Shane. Thank you, and welcome to the third hearing of the Standing Committee on Social Issues inquiry into homelessness amongst older people aged over 55 in New South Wales. The inquiry is examining the rate of homelessness and factors affecting incidence of homelessness among older people, as well as impacts on health and wellbeing and challenges in navigating homelessness services. I acknowledge the Darking Young people, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. Today we'll be hearing from a number of stakeholders, including key community service providers and advocacy organisations and representatives from Central Coast Council. In the afternoon we'll also conduct a roundtable discussion with individuals with lived experiences. I thank everyone for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearings. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. The proceedings are also being recorded and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have the right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer questions today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. In terms of audibility of the hearing today, I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into the microphone. On that matter as well, you will see a button on that microphone that needs to be switched on for your microphone to be working. I will ask, though, if you are not speaking, to turn them off, because I think there's a limit on the number of live microphones at any one time. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome our first witnesses. Could each witness please, starting from my left, please state their name and position and swear either the oath or affirmation provided. I don't know whether your microphone is on, Mr. Starr.
Good morning. Michael Starr, Chief Executive Officer from Coast Shelter. And oath. And I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Is everyone okay with that order? Can everyone hear that okay? Or can we? Thank you. We'll continue down the line, Mr. Lynch.
Good morning, Ian Lynch, Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Link Housing. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Good morning, Daphne Wayland, also from Pacific Link, Executive Manager, Governance and Compliance, and I also solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I'm Cathy Beverley. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Coast and Country Primary Care. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Hey, good morning. My name's Joel Smeaton. I'm the team leader of the Health on the Streets program for Coast and Country Primary Care. And I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to open the opportunity for an opening statement from each organisation. If we can keep that quite brief, to sort of 2 minutes if we can. However, if you do have a longer statement, we're happy to take a written statement and incorporate that into Hansard. Mr Starr, would you have a statement you'd like to start us off with?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair. Coast Shelter is a specialist homelessness service operating here on the New South Wales Central Coast. We're the largest provider of that service in between Sydney and Newcastle. And we provide housing through a number of crisis refuges for women with or without accompanying children, young people, and also for men, and domestic violence rapid enhancement programs as well, residential and outreach services. I would ask the committee, as you work your way through the inquiry and your hearings with people and the submissions, to ensure that any suite of recommendations that you're looking at for this issue is an integrated response, that we don't leave employment behind, that we don't leave health behind, and that we also look at more than just the housing option for people. We are finding more and more often that people over the age of 55 are quite often socially excluded as well. So employment, and whether it's paid or non-paid work experience or activities, are extremely important for people to reintegrate once they are experiencing homelessness, and that has also been our experience. We're very grateful for this inquiry. And we're very grateful that it's happening earlier. My colleague Ian Lynch first raised his concerns around this, the prevalence of people over 55 experiencing homelessness almost 2 years ago. And we're very grateful that you're responding to it quite early, that we're not leaving this issue to fester and become a crisis point where all we'll be doing is tinkering on the edges. So we're very grateful for the inquiry, and we look forward to any recommendations that flow from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A statement from Pacific Link.
Thank you to the committee for your invitation to appear here today. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Darkinjung land and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Pacific Link Housing is one of 19 Tier 1 registered community housing providers, or CHPs, in New South Wales. Pacific Link Housing owns or manages more than 1,400 homes from the southern end of the Central Coast up as far as Port Stephen and into the lower Hunter Valley. Over the last 5 years, we've built almost 130 social and affordable or mixed tenancy homes within this footprint, with an approximate 90 additional homes in our development pipeline. However, as with nearly all CHPs across the state, Pacific Link Housing is equity challenged. While we have successfully raised our profile through award-winning and innovative projects such that developers are approaching us with opportunities to build more, we are constrained by a limited balance sheet and regulator and financier covenants with a 45% debt to equity ratio. The New South Wales Government's Community Housing Innovation Fund, or CHIF, has assisted equity constraints on eligible projects, and we have been successful in being awarded around $8.2 million in funding towards 28 homes across 5 projects in the region, most of which are targeting older people. We were also successful with the Communities Plus program. That meant, combined with National Housing Finance Investment Corporation funding, we could build and retain 21 units at our Glendale project. The current development environment is increasingly challenging for the private sector, and we believe now represents an opportunity for the New South Wales Government to invest counter-cyclically in new social and affordable housing projects. We encourage government to continue to fund CHPs via the CHIF grant program or other similar upfront capital equity programs, as well as consider other avenues such as title transfer targets from government to CHPs. As a smaller regional provider, Pacific Link has not benefited in the past from the title transfers of LAC-owned properties in the past. Available equity would no doubt attract other joint equity partnerships with institutional or other investors. CHPs, such as Pacific Link Housing, can access the fixed long-term low-cost debt finance from NIFIC like no other entity. NIFIC acts as an aggregator of CHP asset portfolios to package the sector and access equity from larger superannuation funds seeking long-term stable ethical returns. Currently, Pacific Link Housing, like most other CHPs, is having to decline otherwise suitable opportunities to create or acquire additional social and affordable housing due to inadequate equity capacity. We understand that the evaluation of the 2017 Social Housing Management Transfer Program is due shortly for release, and we anticipate that that will demonstrate CHP capacity to manage social housing properties better than government organisations. The CHP sector is closely regulated through national and New South Wales compliance and performance frameworks. The COVID pandemic impact on the Central Coast and Lower Hunter region on rental housing affordability has been disastrous, with soaring rents and negligible vacancies. Being an attractive holiday region, this has exacerbated the level of empty second homes, notably demonstrating in the horrifying findings from the recent census that there are 1 million vacant properties around Australia. As we found in our participation in the Together Home program, homelessness can be fixed. With the right model and funding, we coordinated with local support agencies here on the coast, such as Coast Shelter, to apply the housing first approach that allowed many older people to simply have an address. As an indication of the issue of older people homelessness, 25 of our 46 Together Home properties were filled with people aged over 55. From the starting point of providing a safe home, we could then help them access aged care support and NDIS. In a first world nation, surely this is the minimum we can do to help the generation that helped make Australia the nation it is today. Thank you again to the Chair and Committee for inviting Pacific Link here today, and we look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. And a statement from Coast and Country Care? Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters that we are on today in Darkinjung country, to the Aboriginal elders, past, present and emerging. Health on the Streets is the program that Coast and Country Primary Care have been providing since 2019. We were fortunate to be funded through the previous member for Robertson, who was able to obtain funding for us, just under $1 million to provide services to those who are homeless and who are sleeping rough. This enabled us to reduce hospital demand by providing medical health, drug, alcohol and mental health and sexual health assessments to those sleeping rough, those vulnerable or those homeless on the New South Wales Central Coast. We've been able to provide care to manage chronic diseases such as Hep C, wound management and drug prescription via GP telehealth consultations. We're able to reduce the medical, psychological and financial burden of the homeless and those sleeping rough on individuals and the community. We're able to promote mental health and well-being. We can assure the rights of people with mental health problems and mental health illness and enable them to participate in society. We can also assist with accessing temporary and permanent accommodation. The clients that we see from the Central Coast are made up of the following. 93% of our clients that present to our team have a mental health disorder or mental health issue. 15% recognise that they come from a domestic violence situation. 29% come from a First Nations background. 76% identify as homeless, and the remaining percentage identify themselves as rough sleepers or couch surfers. Over the last 2 years, we've engaged with 500 clients on the Central Coast. We've been able to provide 2,800 hours of assertive outreach. Essentially, we have a refurbished ambulance which has been kitted out to enable our team to work with our collaborative partners, Pacific Link Housing and also 2 Coast Shelter, as well as a number of other organisations on the coast. Collaboration and partnership is key to what makes our services work, particularly for the client, and in that way we can achieve the best outcome for those clients. Over the last 2 years, we've provided 2,000 clinical interventions by our nurses. Our team is made up of a team leader, an outreach worker, a registered nurse, a sexual health registered nurse, and a drug and alcohol registered nurse. Over the last 2 years, we've been able to connect 45 clients to the NDIS. We've been able to connect our clients to 200 GP consultations. We've provided 125 fit packs or take-home naloxone. We've provided 531 blood tests, 25 Hep C treatments, 109 Hep B vaccinations, and a range of COVID testing and, of course, vaccines. We're very appreciative of the opportunity to come today to present about the work that we do on the Central Coast. We feel we're touching the tip of the iceberg. The makeup of our clients are largely male. 70% of those are male, 30% are females. But of that 30%, we're starting to see a growing percentage of those who are older. Currently, we're seeing 20% of those females as being over 55. We don't know why we're seeing the increase in those numbers, but certainly, as my colleagues have pointed out, the number of barriers that those who are less fortunate, those who are vulnerable in our community, are certainly facing greater barriers. Thank you again for the opportunity to come this morning, and I look forward to the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I sort of picked up, I think the bulk of them were pre-written statements, so we might see if Hansard can grab them just to help them with their transcribing. To open the question, I might start down the end with Reverend Nile.
My question is directed to Mr. Starr. In your submission, you mentioned your early intervention health relationship education program entitled Love Bites, which you delivered to 20 local schools last year. Can you tell us more about this program?
Thanks, Reverend Nile. We've been delivering that service in partnership with a number of other organisations on the coast for quite a number of years now. At the moment, the funding that we receive is it's a federally funded program. Unfortunately, the best we've been able to secure is recurring every 12 months. But we're seeing some great outcomes with the program at the moment. We use facilitators, some of the people that are engaged in the program with us that are delivering on a volunteer basis, facilitators delivering the program and the workshops into schools through health, through police, New South Wales Police, education, a whole range of stakeholders. So it really is, I would prefer, if it's a nationally accredited program through NAPCAN, I would actually prefer if we could start that program a lot earlier. than what we do now. It's really targeted more towards high school students, that age group at the moment. But we're in discussions about how we can probably look at delivering the program, tailored program, much earlier on. In the last 12 months, what we've tried to do is make sure that we engage a lot more with the key people in the school system. Also to make sure that we can engage and work with some of the more vulnerable students at the moment that are either experiencing family violence at home, which is obviously having an impact on their attendance at school, is obviously having an impact on their behaviour and how they treat others, and that intergenerational cycle that we see around violence and other antisocial behaviour. When COVID hit, one of the things we needed to do was work out how we could actually continue on with the program, and we've actually developed in partnership with NAPCAN and also Newcastle University a virtual model, an online model, so to deliver it into schools. We are planning to continue that on as well as the face-to-face delivery model, so have a blended approach, I guess, to delivering the program. And we're also looking at delivering it a little bit of a wider reach in the future as well. So looking at delivering, again, some sort of bespoke healthy relationships programs to younger people when they transition into other higher education as well. So it's a great success, you know, you know, we've delivered it, you know, to well over 3,000 students since we've been, just on the Central Coast, since we've been delivering the program. We're continuing it on. It's really gathering pace again at the moment. We're back in a lot more schools delivering face-to-face sessions every week now, and a whole range of schools, public system, private system, the Catholic education system as well. So it's quite diverse, and we're looking at TAFE as well.
Ms Boyd?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, all of you, for coming today. I just wanted to ask you, and I might start with you, Mr Starr, given that your organisation has been working on the coast since 1992. I understand from Shelter, New South Wales, that the Central Coast has the highest rate of homelessness of any local government area outside of Metropolitan Sydney. Why do you think that is? What is it about the Central Coast that is driving up our rates of homelessness?
I think what I would say with that is that homelessness and people experiencing homelessness is not exclusive to the New South Wales Central Coast. We have very high rates of apprehended violence orders through the court system. Domestic and family violence, as you know, is one of the great precursors to people experiencing homelessness, and that is plenty of evidence to support that. We are seeing, yes, we see high rates of people facing homelessness on the Central Coast, but if you were to look at rough sleeping, for example, there's an annual street count that's been taking place for, I think, the last 3 years now, and we're part of that. It's a government initiative through the Department of Communities and Justice, and you see that bounce around. You see, you know, perhaps 50 people counted in 1 year, and then the next year it drops by 50-60%, and then the next year it goes up again, and it bounces around. So I think what we're experiencing at the moment is the changing face of homelessness as well. So a lot more people living in very unsafe and precarious situations. We are seeing a lot more young people. It is just very unsafe for them to be at home, and so we are seeing that play out as well. That contributes obviously to some of the rising homelessness. And, you know, couch surfing, things like that. We're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing a lot more people that are and this is again hard to spot, but we're seeing a lot of people that are living out of their vehicle. We've experienced clients in the last 12 months, women that have been living in a car with children going to school, which is absolutely an unacceptable situation for such a wealthy state and a wealthy country to be in, to place those people in that situation. So yeah, look, we are seeing high rates at the moment. I think we're seeing a number of issues contributing to what to it as well. We're seeing a rental vacancy rate of 1 or less than 1% on the Central Coast. We've had exceptionally high rents for quite some time now, and we do have a lack. The lack of investment in social and affordable housing, not just around the country, but particularly on the Central Coast, is really starting to bite hard.
Perhaps I could ask Mr Lynch as well to reflect on that question, but also I'm interested, I know that at least a few years ago there was a lot of anecdotal evidence about people travelling from other areas to the Central Coast when they were homeless, because that, particularly during warmer weather, they could sleep on the beach, or they could, it was perhaps a better place to be when you're homeless. Can you reflect on that? Are we still seeing that? And what else do you think is driving up homelessness on the coast?
I think definitely, and the fact that it's a short train ride from Sydney Central, it gives a very cheap way to escape the pressures of the city. I'm sure Joel could reflect on the number of rough sleepers in places down like on Edlong Beach. There's also quite a good number of service offerings on the Central Coast, which does attract homeless people to those services and the availability of them. But ultimately, when I'm reflecting, I think, the Central Coast is a beautiful place to live. It's geographically beautiful, but those attributes, whilst is a desirable place to live, it's also a very challenging place to develop and for supply to keep up with demand in end-to-end spectrum of residential housing. The supply just does not keep up with the demand, and there's a trickle-down effect. And I think also the final point I'd make is that the census from 2011 to 2016 reflected a net reduction in the availability of social housing in this area. It's been somewhat made up by community housing provided developments in the area in the subsequent years, but not quite back to the levels of 2011.
Thank you.
Mr Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, particularly in regards to health on the streets, so I'll direct them to Kathy Beverley. Could you tell us how health on the streets relieves pressure on other services like emergency departments? Do you have any quantification of how that might help our local emergency system?
Certainly, and I will defer to Joel Smeaton if that's all right as well, because Joel actually is working at the coalface with clients. But just in answer to your question, we receive referrals from a number of sources. Obviously, the police, council rangers, ambulance service, paramedics, and in terms of access to health services, that can be particularly complicated for someone who's homeless and who doesn't have the resources to make that access easy. That has certainly been one of the roles of our team, is to assist that easier access into the health system. We estimate that someone who is homeless may need a hospital admission at least half a dozen times in a year. Many of the clients that we see have chronic health conditions such as Hep C, Hep B, as I mentioned earlier, liver cirrhosis, a number of sexual health issues, and they are a significant financial burden, I think, as we all know, on the health system. So we estimate with, on average, someone who is homeless requiring access to accident and emergency, not necessarily a hospital admission. On average, for a very basic assessment, you're normally looking at around $1,000 or so. By our team being able to provide blood tests, urine tests, mental health assessments, we obviously can short-circuit that pathway for the client into the hospital system. And so therefore can obviously reduce those costs to the hospital system by either preventing that entry to accident emergency or then potentially the flow on to an admission to the hospital.
Okay. Thank you. My understanding is around 93% of your clients present with a mental health condition. Would you be able to just touch on briefly some of the mental health support that your service provides?
So we will do a screening assessment upon referral, and I guess the other thing to recognise too that not every person who is homeless wants to engage with our service. Sometimes it can take our team 6 to 12 months to create that level of trust, build that relationship with that individual. So not every person who is homeless, beg your pardon, are we able to provide a service to. But from a mental health perspective, we're able to do a mental health screening as part of our overall health assessment. We do have a number of standardised mental health outcome measures that are widely used throughout the mental health system. We're able to administer those tools and be able to then provide the referring clinician more concrete data around what that person's issues are, how they're presenting, etc. We see obviously a range of people with different mental health orders, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder. Drug and alcohol issues are obviously one of the more significant issues that we do see. And also too, obviously, drug and alcohol dependency as well. In terms of access, we're able to connect through our mobile van. We're able to provide telehealth appointments with local GPs. We've been able to engage with around 45 GPs on the coast who are willing to see people who are homeless through telehealth. And that's been a significant improvement to access to primary health care. That GP can obviously provide prescriptions. Our team will then obviously go and help the client get those prescriptions filled, and sometimes we're having to provide the financial assistance for that as well as obviously connecting them to the local health district mental health services. So that's obviously really important that we've got those connections and relationships with the team, the psychiatrists, obviously at the hospital, to enable that more rapid entry. If we were to see a client today and say you need to go to the hospital and see a mental health clinician, it's inevitable that probably wouldn't happen. Certainly our team can assist in providing that easier access and quicker access to services.
Thank you. I understand just short of a third of your clients, I believe, are First Nation Australians. I also understand that your program is doing some outstanding work in hepatitis C identification and treatment. I just want to pick up on the funding of your organisation. You mentioned in your opening statement that the then member for Robertson, Lucy Wicks, provided $1 million of funding. Is that the first government funding your organisation received for this program?
Yeah, Coast and Country Primary Care has been in existence since 2015. We originated. Our history was we have evolved from the divisions of general practice and Medicare local to now become a primary health care provider on the Central Coast. So that was our first funding that we received for Health on the Streets. Our team identified a gap in services on the Central Coast, and we were fortunate to receive that funding. Unfortunately, that funding has expired. And our service does only provide services on a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 perspective.
So on that point, my understanding is there was a commitment from the previous Liberal government, from the local member, to extend the funding to $2.2 million.
Yes, correct.
So has the new Labor member for Robertson provided your organisation with an explanation as to why they've cut that funding?
They have provided funding for another year of $400,000, but we haven't received a commitment for the $2.2 million that we were promised as part of the Lucy's election.
Have you received an explanation? Because it's wonderful work that you're doing.
Sorry, we might just kick it along. Sorry, mate. We're just going to have to get a couple more questions in before we wrap up.
Thank you.
If we've got time to come back. Ms Jackson?
Thanks. I might direct this question to Mr Lynch and Ms Wayland. One of the consistent pieces of evidence that we've heard over the 2 days of hearings that we've already had is the need for more social and affordable housing. Obviously, it's already been referenced this morning. In your opening statement, Mr Lynch, and in your submissions, sort of talked a little bit about maybe some of the challenges that you've found, planning challenges, regulatory challenges in delivering social and affordable housing, and also some of the missed opportunities for partnerships. Again, you sort of mentioned that in your opening statement as well. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate on that, because it's, as I said, it's been really clear that this is something that we need, and just keen to tease out, you know, some of the missed opportunities and the challenges we might be facing in actually delivering that in a community that sort of so obviously needs it.
Thank you for the question. I think the last time there was significant investment or structural change in social housing was under the Rudd government stimulus after the GFC, which involved a lot of title transfers. The bringing on of asset titles, and in terms of land titles onto CHP balance sheets, is quite profound, and there's been a lot of statements made about that into the inquiry. The CHPs are uniquely positioned to be able to leverage that asset. So every $1 of government asset that comes onto a CHP's balance sheet will provide a 45-cent return when we're able to leverage it. State governments like Land Housing Corporation owned entity is not able to enter into debt arrangements. So there is a missed opportunity there. That is debt financing, and a basic property investment tells you that leveraged capital investment makes sense, even in subsidised rental settings, because of the low-cost funding, debt finance that is available. So I'd say that's the number one missed opportunity by a long shot. I think in terms of, you know, moving things forward, upfront capital grant funding, such as the CHIF that has been implemented in the past few years, is definitely a step forward, but that is money straight out of the government's coffers and needs to be budgeted accordingly. That's why I think structural change in terms of the way asset ownership is handled would provide a profound and quite instant benefit with no budget impact in the future. So I would say that's the number one opportunity. Have you got anything else?
The only thing I'd add to that as well is unlocking Commonwealth rent assistance. I don't think it's well understood, but federal money flows, it's known as CRA, flows to tenants of public housing, but it doesn't flow to, it doesn't flow to tenants of public housing.
Sorry, could you just come a bit closer to the mic there, please?
My apologies. Commonwealth rent assistance flows to tenants of community housing, but not to tenants of public housing. So that's another opportunity for funding to flow from the Commonwealth into community housing providers that the state government can't access. So that's one. The other missed opportunity that Ian was mentioning was a developer recently approached us with an excellent deal that we would like to have been part of in normal circumstances, but our balance sheet's constrained. We have to be particularly careful about which developments we go into to add affordable housing supply for our community. And be very careful and manage that carefully, obviously, but we'd love to have more equity in our balance sheet to be able to do more. We, as a community housing sector, you'll have seen the submission from our peak body, are delivering great amounts of new affordable housing supply to address the homelessness issue that we're here to talk about at a greater rate than government in many cases. So we tend to deliver it more cheaply as well. That's the other figure that came out of the CHIF analysis. So that grant funding delivers for the cost of $185,000 per unit a new housing. We, by giving that funding to community housing providers, we can then, as Ian was pointing out, go and leverage that, go and access other equity that we bring into that equity stack, as they talk about, and deliver more housing more cheaply for government, and then access the Commonwealth Rent Assistance that I mentioned.
In the very short time we have left, I'll ask each agency a simple question. You wake up tomorrow morning and you're the Premier of New South Wales. In terms of addressing the issues that's before the committee, what's the very first thing you do as Premier? What's your highest priority? Can I begin with Mr. Starr?
Well, be careful what you wish for, is the first thing that I would say about me waking up as the Premier in New South Wales. Look, in relation to this issue, we're talking about money quite a lot, and funding and so on. I often wonder if money was the solution to a lot of these problems, we'd have fixed them years ago. Yes, it's part of the solution, but I think what I would be trying to do is get rid of a lot of the red tape that exists, some of the things that Ian has been talking about and Daphne's mentioned as well, get a much better collaboration between local organisations, particularly on the Central Coast. That'd be important, but across the state as well. Get rid of the many siloed approaches that we see around service delivery, asset management and other things. So I guess I think I would also make sure that whatever investments are being made, that they are being measured, they're being monitored, that we are it's very transparent around the outcomes. Are people's lives improving because of the investment? And is there a real difference being made to the issue that's being addressed? So I guess that, that'd be one of the things. And if it's not happening, the people are brave enough and bold enough to redirect that funding elsewhere.
Thank you. Premier Lynch and Premier Whalen.
The New South Wales Government has already started a process of social housing management transfers. It's signing up to the nationally supported target of 36%, I think it is, transfer of the management of social housing to the community housing provider sector, because there's a broad array of evidence of the sector doing it better than government entities. As Premier, I would set a 10-year plan to not only continue to increase the threshold of that target of social housing management transfer, but I would also set targets for title transfer. So title transfer combined with management transfer will eliminate a lot of the red tape that we have to go through, the hoops we jump through, and I would be relying on the solid foundation of the national regulatory system that government is going to get the outcomes that it wants. I
think my priority as Premier would be to permanently fund and increase the allocations on the Together Homes program. So that's an initiative from the current government that was a stimulus, if you like, from an outcome from COVID, basically to get rough sleepers or other homeless funded directed to community housing providers like ourselves, where we could bring together our partners in homelessness provision, the higher level, I guess the higher level of funding that you need for that cohort. We've heard how they're quite difficult to engage. So that would be my priority, is keep Together Homes program going and fund it as a permanent outcome, because it's certainly delivering results and there's certainly need for it.
Thank you. And finally, Premier Beverley and Premier Smeaton, please.
Thank you. In addition to my colleagues' comments, I feel a couple of the key things would certainly be data. I think we could do a lot better having much more effective ways of collecting and analysing our data around the broader area of homelessness, whether that be social, health, employment issues. I think our data certainly can help us make more effective and more cost-effective decisions for this group. Definitely a national approach or statewide approach, if I'm the Premier, would be certainly very much a priority. Again, I think as my colleagues have indicated, the siloed effect doesn't lead to achieving the best outcome for the client. Certainly, I think we've got more work we can do in working collaboratively together. The other thing from a health perspective is Health on the Streets is a unique program. There's nothing like this program across the state nor in the country. It's the only one of its kind in terms of being an assertive outreach, health and medical service for people who are homeless. And there is a responsibility that I can see from perhaps our state health partners in connectivity between our health systems and what's happening on the street to be more funded to enable us to achieve those outcomes. Thank you.
Yes, I believe that, it's a bit loud, that if there was more money allocated to family programs, in particular mental health programs, I believe that would directly reduce homelessness in Australia. A high percentage of our clients or patients come from trauma backgrounds, and I believe that if there's more money thrown into those family/mental health programs, that's where unfortunately a lot of the trauma comes from. I believe that there will be a massive decrease in homelessness. And as Kathy said, our program is unique. We provide both social and medical assistance to our clients. We recently visited a similar program in Brisbane. It's been going for a long time, the MICA projects, and for the size of our program, I believe that we have way better outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you all very much for your time this morning. Very insightful and very helpful for us. The committee does have the opportunity to ask additional questions. If that is the case, or if you have taken anything on notice, the Secretariat will be in touch and you'll have 21 days to respond to those questions. So thank you once again very much for your time. As they're preparing everything down there, we might move on and welcome our next witnesses. Again, thank you very much for appearing. As we're getting settled, I might ask each witness as we move down the line to state their name, position, title and swear either an oath or affirmation, please. Starting with you, Ms Naden. I presume that has been provided?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Suzanne Naden, I'm the CEO of Bungaree Aboriginal Association here on the Central Coast.
And sorry, do you have an oath or affirmation?
Sorry. Affirmation. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Hi, I'm Robin Sutherland. I am a caseworker at Specialist Homeless Service caseworker for Bungaree. Affirmation. I solemnly swear and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Hello, I'm Jade Brown and I'm the Youth and Homelessness Lead for Doorways with Uniting. I will be giving an affirmation today. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Hello, my name is Jody Madigan and I'm a caseworker for the Uniting Doorways program. I will give an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
My name's Michael Weeks. I'm the founder of Coast Hands, a grassroots and community-funded charity that looks after the homeless here on the Central Coast. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. I'll now ask if each organisation would like to make an opening statement, as brief as we can, about 2 minutes. As a guide that's sort of, if it's much more than a page or 2 pages, happy for you to table that document and it would still be incorporated into the report. So, would we like one?
Go stop on the line. Okay. Just briefly, Bungaree's response to the terms of reference will be based on our request for a commitment from New South Wales Government and its agencies to include Aboriginal cultural prerequisites. That should always be an explanation through New South Wales Government policies that include with clarity and guarantees that we identified and will be a part of the target group cohort, and not a simple paragraph with no clear guide or commitment for Aboriginal people, which is across a lot of different policies that could be very effective to Aboriginal people to assist us with housing and homelessness.
Thank you. Uniting?
Thank you to the committee, members, for allowing us to speak to you today and speaking into regards to homelessness for those over the age of 55. I would also like to acknowledge that we are standing on Darking Young land and pay our respects to elders past, present and those who are emerging. On the Central Coast, our Uniting Doorways program is a well-established specialist homelessness service. Since January 2020, our Doorways program has seen 1,145 clients and 175 of those have been over the age of 56. On average, 18.6% of our clients identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Around 60.5% present as male and 39.5% present as female. 13% are on the age pension. Over 50% of our clients have a mental health diagnosis. Over the last 2.5 years, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on homelessness on the Central Coast. During this time, the private rental vacancy rate has been low, hovering around 1%, and what that looks like is we used to have around 400 properties every month, and that's now dwindled down to around 100. Also in that time, our rental prices have been increasing on an average of 26.6%. Clients over the age of 55 are easily one of the most vulnerable cohorts of homelessness. However, when we speak about those who are over 55, we would like to consider there's 2 types of cohorts. The cohort between the age of 55 and 60 at 6.5 who are reliant on JobSeeker are particularly vulnerable to homelessness based on a lack of affordable accommodation. Currently, there is not one available property for somebody on a JobSeeker payment. They also face age discrimination that further restricts their access. Clients that come into our service between these ages have very limited accommodation options, and there is currently only one male refuge on the Central Coast. The cohort over 65 and a half and older are entitled to that age pension, which provides some options in the rental market. If someone is over the age of 65, a case manager is able to increase their chances through aged care accessibility and also providing a referral to Baptist Care, who is an aged care housing provider. However, we are aware that their funding might be under a cloud. If people in this older cohort find themselves in temporary accommodation, this is not a durable solution and longer term options are limited. One solution Uniting is implementing is offering rental options for retirement living rather than lump sum ingoing contributions. This will open up more choices for older Australians who don't own property and who don't have savings. Uniting would also like to support the Home at Last Older Persons Housing and Referral Service, which exists in Victoria, and this would ensure more age-appropriate homelessness services. The entrance backpackers, boarding houses or Strathaven are well known on the Central Coast but are not suitable for over 55. I recently had a client who was 69 and I was trying to get him a room in Strathaven, and the property manager said to me that he didn't want to take him due to his vulnerability and being taken advantage of by other residents that are there. Doorways caseworkers looks at these clients' housing application statuses. We help get them onto the wait list. We then advocate that we get them onto the priority wait list, and currently the priority wait list for someone who is over the age of 55 will need to be 80, so we need to look at other priority factors. The priority status currently on the Central Coast is unknown. However, we think about the 3-year mark and we want to know where do these people go in the interim. I think one of the things we want to highlight to the inquiry is that caravan parks play a pivotal role in housing those people who are older, and that closing those parks for whatever reason will drive up homelessness. What is particularly concerning at this time, Homeland's Caravan Park, which is a residential caravan park for those over 55, have just issued around 70 termination notices, and those residents need to leave by November. It worries us where these people will end up and how, as a sector that is already at capacity, will help to assist to find alternative accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weeks?
I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here and speak. I'd like to apologise in advance. We were not made aware of this until a couple of days ago, so we haven't had that much time to research. So if I'm unable to answer any of your questions, I do apologise. As I said, we're a grassroots organisation, so we're entirely community funded. We receive no funding whatsoever from the government. Everything we do is via our community and the network that we've built in local business and local suppliers. Since roughly 2018, late 2018, we run street services, one here in Gosford every week, and we run one in Woolloomooloo in Sydney. That's 3 weekly. Since about 2 years ago, we've put 12,000 meals into this community. And again, I want to stress that all of this has been done just via the community. There is no funding that we take. We've also put roughly the same amount of meals into the community via our street service. So we do 60 to 100 meals per week on the streets of Gosford for the homeless community. We also supply Tukley, San Remo and Wyong neighbourhood centres, Canwell and the Entrance Community Centres, Wyong High, Wyong Public and Brook Avenue School, again with no funding. This all comes from our community. One of the main things that I'd like to stress is the lack of involvement that I seem to see down this end of the coast. I spoke to a number of different service providers when we were made aware of this inquiry, and not one of them knew that this inquiry was happening. So over the course of the conversation, that's something I'd really like to see addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We might just, I think, Ms Brown, yours was a written statement. We might just see if we can slip that to Hansard to help them with their transcript, if that's okay. And I'll open up to questions to Ms Jackson.
Thank you. I'd like to start by directing this question probably to Uniting and the other organisations that are specialist homelessness services, because I'm obviously keen to see what the transition from that sort of crisis accommodation that you're offering into more permanent solutions looks like. We've heard a little bit of evidence that it seems pretty clear that permanent housing solutions for low-income people on the coast is pretty limited. So what are people doing? You know, they come into the specialist homelessness services. Obviously, you're providing them some support. Are they staying in transitional housing, or are people sort of exiting back into homelessness because the permanent housing solutions just aren't available?
where we get really stuck is what you were saying. We're a crisis service. And so what that looks like for Uniting is that a client will come into us and we have 3 months to work with them to help them achieve some sort of goal. And talking to, within my opening statement, I was mentioning the mental health issues that they present with. They also present with alcohol and drug dependencies, mental health, trauma. There's a lot of risk factors in why someone ends up with us. And with a 3-month turnaround, trying to find them alternative accommodation, that's where the struggle is. So what we would like to see is extended case management to be able to help support these people. But to get to the question of where do they go, I think that's where we don't have accommodation as a service. And so a lot of what we try to embed is that we need to get them a step further to long-term accommodation. So that's where we put in our housing applications. We, find short-term solutions, but as I'm talking, there's very limited amount of those. So where they go is often to those boarding houses, into Strathaven, into backpackers. Currently, right now, I feel like on the Central Coast that we're talking a lot about people needing to leave the Central Coast. A lot of people need to share, and those to us are not solutions.
I wondered if the representatives of Bungaree had anything to add in terms of the exiting from your specialist homelessness services?
I guess we were only told 2 minutes and simply make a statement, otherwise I would have told you exactly what Bungaree does. We're not just simply a specialist homelessness services, we're also a Tier 2 nationally registered community housing provider as well. And we also are an aged care provider, disability services provider, child protection, transport, and youth mentoring program, and many other things. So we provide a holistic sort of service as well. But for us, and I guess for Aboriginal participants, or who we seem or deem is in the cohort or category of homelessness, is very different to those in the eligibility or accessibility to services as non-Aboriginal people. So our service is to all Aboriginal people. It doesn't come down to an age specific for accessibility for services. So anybody that comes to us that's at risk of homelessness or homelessness is eligible for a service in the homelessness program. The other part that we have, so we have numerous opportunities to accommodate as well, because we also have transitional properties, not just attached to the homelessness program, but through our other cohort that we manage through Land and Housing Corp as well. As a community housing provider, we've also, and providing in-home services now for over 20 years to Aboriginal people who are our tenants as well, because we actually own more properties than what we do property manage for New South Wales Government. So we own probably over 55 properties, and a majority of those are for ageing duplexes as well. So in identifying that, our people are living longer here on the coast. So we are getting past, our clients and our people are living into their 80s with the 20-year or plus in-home support services provided by us as part of their tenancy support. So we've just redeveloped one of our own properties to elders duplexes. Now, they were actually to create a housing continuum for us internally, because we need more family homes. However, we immediately had to take that off the table, and we housed an Aboriginal woman that was in her 50s, homeless, sleeping in her car at the local club and going through cancer treatment. So the board decided to immediately house that person, and we put in home services as well from the My Aged Care Transport and the SHS team. Immediately wrapped around and created a case management plan for that one. The other property then also went to another elderly gentleman who had just been advised that he had to leave his private rental home that he'd been in for 25 plus years, and he was now 75. Now, on an aged care pension and that sort of thing, you're not going to find any accommodation here within the spectrum of that income and that low income as a one person, not even as a family. So we then accommodated him immediately and put on the back burner. However, we're also now redeveloping also, and that was just before Christmas, those were completed, and we're just about to start and we just purchased another property just before Christmas with the HU funding, because that other development was done. So we went out and purchased another property because it saved us, and we're just about to redevelop another elders duplexes for the same reason, because we're clearly identified our ageing population are those that actually need to be accommodated far more quicker. On the other flip side of that, we have a lot more of our ageing population, grandparents, taking their family in full-time care as well. So they're also requiring family homes just as much as anybody else. So they will start in accommodation that is really only for over 50s or over 55s, whichever spectrum you're in. Then all of a sudden they're taking custody of their grandchildren or other family members, then require a family home. So we're sort of thinking, but I think we have a bit more flexibility of transitioning to immediate, a transitional accommodation. I'm not sure. We walked in when Pacific Link was here. So Bungaree is also a service contractor to the Together Home program. We're one of the case managers for the Together Home program with Pacific Link, and we have both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal participants that choose us through that program. But the other program that we have is through the My Aged Care program. We have the Assistant with Care and Housing program, if I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. So that's an over 50s at-risk or homelessness program. We're one of the first in the country to get that 5 years ago, and we've been delivering it ever since. So that's hoarder and squalor advocacy and tenancy support. So I also have a team of homelessness sitting in my aged care team, as well as another team that do the general cohort. So again, don't get me wrong, we still have an issue around stock. We still have issue around opportunity of different dwelling types that accurately reflect that and the needs of the population.
I might just ask one more quick question before I throw to my colleague. A comment that you made there, in relation to, for example, the particular needs of grandparents acting as carers for the younger generations. That's something that we've heard sort of occasionally referenced, but it hasn't been necessarily a core part of the evidence that we've received. And I think in a way I'd like to ask you to elaborate on that, in terms of the particular needs and requirements of First Nations people in this space. As you mentioned, you're keen for it not to just be a kind of throwaway line or paragraph at the end of our work, but to be embedded. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, and obviously Ms Sutherland as well, to elaborate on, what do we really need to hear when it comes to the particular First Nations voice on this issue?
So the issue around where we've got growing numbers, so as most people know, cultural for us is keeping the kids within home. We want to reduce the overrepresentation of children within the out-of-home care. We want to be able to provide that. Now, we're all sort of stuck, whether it's us, whether it's somebody in public housing, is that, all of a sudden we have an elder or an ageing person in a duplex, and all of a sudden they come to us and go, I now need a house because I'm about to take, custody of 5 of my grandchildren, and if you can't give me a house that complements that family, the kids' ages, their gender, and all of these things that are a requirement under a custody planning, is they will go into care. And we're like, okay, hold on a sec, what? And so we've had that multiple times internally, where we've had people in smaller dwellings that have then got custody of their grandchildren. So we've had to do a bit of internal shuffling around to be able to ensure that, and internal transfers to ensure that they remain together. We do have other supported services that help, not only have a child protection team, but we also have an education gaps team that then support. We bring all the services in, so if they're elderly and they need in-home services, we get them to talk with our My Aged Care team. If any of the children have a disability, we get them to engage with our disability team or our education team if they need to learn how to navigate the education system, because it's a new path. But it's starting to become DCJ or the likes of even the family courts are putting pressure back on the community housing providers to actually come up and be able to accommodate, to ensure that they can stay at home. But the issue here is that, as again, stock is very limited. So we're looking at the fact that we don't want to go to overcrowding. This is what's causing it. There's different definitions of overcrowding. At the moment, we're using the determination or definition under the Canadian and the US of what is overcrowding, which it doesn't accurately reflect our cultural needs. But yes, I think we're moving to a point where we can't accommodate all the requirements that come out of it either. We are trying our best. But, you know, if anybody knows the family law court, is that if you take children into care, whether you're a foster carer, kinship, or go for permanent guardianship, if you've got 5 kids and you've got the girl that's the eldest and the boy's the next eldest, they've got to be in separate rooms from the time that they're of a certain age. And, you know, so it does become a bit of a nightmare. But what we're trying to do is the best that we can is to accommodate and ensure that families stay together the best way that we can. And we work with the government agencies and all of those to try and assist to make sure that that happens, that we don't go back to having a continual overrepresentation of Aboriginal children and try to keep families together. It's the same with our elders. We don't tend to, put them into residential facilities. We do not put them into palliative care. Most of those things occur within the home. For one, who can afford a residential facility or a retirement village, no matter who you are, that doesn't, affordability doesn't allow you to do that. But we do take care of our own at home. Hence why our New South Wales Aboriginal Housing Office has what we always have to attach an additional room apart from the housing complement for cultural needs, which is for family. So our duplexes are built to anywhere from 2 to 3 specs bedrooms, because then it'll allow a carer to come in for end of life if that's required, or a carer at any time. So that's how we build our specs, is that there's always an additional room to allow for a carer or family to move in to assist with any of those, needs at the end. Sorry, I don't know if that answered the question, but it's a roundabout. Sorry, Robin.
Thank you. We're down to about 15 minutes left in this session, but I'll go to Ms Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of you and for all of the great work that you do in our community. I wanted to ask you, Ms Brown, we've heard over the last couple of days of stories of people who are sort of falling through the gaps, who are sort of being passed from one sort of service to another, and that sort of focus on there being a lack of case management or sort of wraparound services for people in addition to giving them a home. I understand that you're involved with the Homelessness Interagency, and I wanted you to tell the committee about what that is and what sort of gaps it's attempting to fill, and perhaps how the government might help with that process.
Great, yeah, thank you, Ms Boyd. The Homelessness Interagency is part of Uniting's, I guess you would say, contract, but it's something that we're very proud to be a part of. And so that is a bi-monthly meeting where we get all services together. It's for anyone to be a member. It's very easy. They just really have to, give me their email and their phone number, and they're joined up. And what we do is, I guess the focus of the interagency is to help for services to know what other services are around, first and foremost, regarding homelessness. And so it's such a changing sector all the time, and there's always, programs coming in and out. So I hope to create an opportunity for people to be able to liaise with each other and find out what other services are around. I guess the most important part is on the Central Coast there is quite a few services that are there to help assist clients, and what we like to do is work on the no wrong door policy, so anyone that is presenting as homeless can go from any service from one to another. I guess what I would like to see, we could do better, is we're seeing a lot of, progress with the Together Home program, and we very much believe in a housing first model, and that's what the Together Home program does. And it's about providing that home and then that wraparound support, and that's where we hope that the interagency gives the members an opportunity to create wraparound for the clients. Getting the house, although it's not easy, is sometimes the easy part, but trying to keep someone in the house is where we all need to be working together to help that client. And a client who presents with lots of complex needs lots of different services, and no one size kind of fits all. I guess a part of the priority for the interagency is we know that we have a high homelessness rate. We know that post-COVID it's become extremely more difficult, and we see a lot of services under overcapacity and trying the best that they can to help meet the needs of any homeless person. And so we feel as an interagency that the government needs to step in and to help. And so what we try to do is bring them into the interagency space and to help them to advocate the needs of the Central Coast. So I'd like to think that the Homelessness Interagency is a platform where very expertise is there, and we're able to give that information over to politicians to help increase whatever it is that we're needing. And there's been lots of solutions put forward, and we are, I guess, feeling positive that we'll keep that momentum going and hopefully to see some change on the Central Coast.
And if they were to implement a sort of home at last style of homelessness policy in New South Wales, how would that impact on that work you do as in the interagency? Would it sort of help it? Would it sort of shortcut some of your work?
I think anything at this point would help. And I say that because SHS services are at capacity. We're constantly feeling the flood and the influx of people coming in, and we're often having to close. And that's across all SHS services. It's extremely difficult, and that's, to the point where we're having to move people off the Central Coast or, really encourage share accommodation. And so we would really need extra support. And I think with the Homelessness Interagency, if there was a Home at Last program, it would help relieve some of the pressure on the SHS sector and put these cohort, which has its own vulnerabilities. Everybody who is homeless is vulnerable, but there's particular vulnerabilities within the cohort of those who are over 55, and I think having a Home at Last program would help them to achieve the specific goals and have expert people to work with.
Thank you.
We've had 2 hearings so far, both one in Sydney and one in Parramatta. I just wonder what differences you feel that you would see, be they challenges or advantages, although you're hardly remote, but being in a regional area, being not in that city area, what are the differences that you feel you might face as far as delivering the services that you do? Anyone can jump in on that one.
From the homelessness sector here on the Central Coast and the community, there's only a number of us that are community housing providers as well, ourselves, Pacific Link, and that are located here apart from the other SHS services. We work well together. We're a very strong alliance. I think that's one thing that actually does work exceptionally well across the Central Coast for people with homelessness. I think Jade's right. We do work on a no wrong door policy. A non-Aboriginal person works into our services and needs assistance. They won't leave until they get assistance or get linked. If we can't help them, then we'll ensure somebody else helps them. The one issue here, from a community housing provider, we're landlocked here on the coast. So we have the resources like Ian and Daphne had said, where we also go in partnerships for developments as well to get better outcomes, whether they're social and affordable. But at the moment, we're like Sydney, we're landlocked. We're getting developers coming in over us and outbidding us. We're non-for-profits. We can only purchase for the land value. But for homelessness, I think we need to think outside the box. There are different ways of working together. There's ways to work collaboratively together. We're reaching out to the likes of Crown Lands, and this is myself, Michael, and Ian, because Michael and Ian and I co-chair a homelessness economic development plan for the Central Coast. Around, going to the likes of Crown Lands, like Land and Housing Corp, and saying, where's your assets? Where's your unusable assets, but developable assets? Give them to us and we'll give you social and affordable outcomes. And we're still waiting for those conversations to be had. We can work together. We can get great outcomes that gives not just supported services, which is always needed, and as Jade said, it clearly identifies that the people that come into this sector, there is trauma background, there is high complex needs, there's long-term associated factors with them that lead them to either being at risk of housing or continually to be homeless. So yeah, there's multiple different things, but we need to not just stop looking at what's exactly available to us and start to look what can be available to us. And that means everybody should be putting on the table exactly what's up for offer and see how best we can get outcomes and achieve them.
Mr Weeks, I might come to you with the same thing, given you operate both here and in Woolloomooloo. What do you see as some of the key differences?
I think transport issues are one of the big key differences up here on the Central Coast. We have one train line basically, and it's right over that side. They struggle to get transport. They struggle to get affordable transport. A lot of these people obviously don't have the money to pay for an Opal card or a ticket or anything else. So they're finding themselves on the trains, and then they're staying on the trains to try and access our services. So we have people that even come from as far as Sydney Central, and they'll come down to our service on a Wednesday to access help, to get food. I think another issue is out of hours. There's basically nothing outside of normal business hours. So that's where we come in, and that's where we create and provide a service that is definitely needed in this area. Any of the lovely people sitting alongside me could place a call to us outside of hours anytime they wanted, and we can get food to people in need. I think that's another big issue as well. So as has been touched on, we really need more communication between our organisations, and we also need to get more community involvement in what we're doing as well.
Thank you very much. Conscious we've got a little over 5 minutes, we might need to smoke a little bit, but Reverend Nile, did you have a question for this cohort?
Yes, just a general one. I think we're all concerned with the report that 1 in 28 Indigenous people were homeless in the 2016 census. That's a very alarming percentage. What activities or programs should we introduce to alleviate that very high percentage of homelessness amongst the Indigenous people? Anyone on the panel?
Well, we can assume that number is probably triple that, because most Aboriginal people don't actually complete a census, and they, on the night either. So, even though that number is alarming, we tend to triple any of those government surveyed self-surveys that are done. The best thing that we can try and do specifically for New South Wales at this point is keep DCJ's commitment to increase the Aboriginal-led services for Aboriginal homelessness, to ensure that their commitment to bring new Aboriginal services into the sector across New South Wales is committed to, and they continue to do that. Bungaree is the only single funded entity Aboriginal service provider in New South Wales from the beginning of the Going Home Staying reform to now. All the other current Aboriginal homelessness services are part of an auspice of a mainstream service. They're not autonomous. So I think if we have more Aboriginal services regionally in different parts of the thing where the priorities and the cohorts currently exist, because that's why we are stressed. We are resource stressed in Sydney and on the Central Coast, because everybody's coming to us to get services, because there are no services out in Dubbo. There's no services in Wagga. There's no services in the North Coast. There's none of these services to provide where somebody can go to them to assist. The other thing that I would like to see the commitment from government that we at this time can get a commitment. So Housing New South Wales currently has, and AHO, has a commitment with an Aboriginal tenancy and advocacy support that any tenant that comes at risk, or in rent arrears, has to be referred to the tenant and advocacy to support the tenancy before it gets to a homelessness or an eviction. And I think we should be able to do that commitment across the board and try and push that. So we're pushing them out to supported services. But again, Aboriginal people, if apart from here, you go out, you're not going to get any of the services that such as Bungaree provide, whether it's housing, homelessness, aged care or disability, that can support somebody in need.
Sorry,
Thank you very much for your leadership.
Can I just ask a quick question? So that tenancy advice, that's only for people in AHO properties, is it? Is that what you're saying? That's not available?
That's an MOU. No, they can be available to anyone. They're available to those in private rental or anything. But New South Wales Aboriginal Housing Office has an MOU with ATAS to actually refer any or any of those at risk that are behind in arrears, have tenancy issues and that sort of stuff, to be referred to them so they can get support to sustain the tenancy. And I believe there is some work going around a model for sustaining tenancies, and we're supporting that too. And I think we did the PW, we're the target, and we're the guinea pigs for everybody. They come to us and go, will you see how this works? But yes, but what we're saying, it should be expanded. Housing New South Wales should also have the same agreement. Community housing providers should have it. When we look at the mainstream housing providers or community housing providers have the largest number of Aboriginal tenancies. They have all the Aboriginal tenancies, not Aboriginal housing providers, it's them. So we need to be getting a commitment across the board in how do we sustain tenancies, and then it will also be that other part that will not lend itself to the homelessness statistics.
Thank you very much for your help.
With a couple of minutes to go, I might go to Mr Primrose, preempting your question, but maybe go right from left rather than left from...
Okay, we'll go right to left. Look, you probably heard me ask the previous people this, and that is, you wake up tomorrow morning, you're the Premier of New South Wales. Can I just ask you to name one thing? What's the very first thing that you would do to try and alleviate or to respond to the issues that this committee's concerned about?
As was mentioned by one of the previous people who sat down here, housing, there's no other way around it. Housing is the first thing that we need to attack. The census said that we've got 1 million homes that are sitting with nobody in them. I remember in Sydney a couple of years ago, a couple of local groups stormed a unit block that had been left abandoned, and their demands were quite simple, that allow the homeless into this area, allow them to use this unit block to keep them off the street. They were met by the riot squad who dragged them out. I can't understand why we don't have more affordable housing, and I can't understand why there's legislative changes being made to certain things. Like, for argument's sake, in 2021 we passed a change that allowed people to use their accommodation for Airbnb or allow people to come and stay in that. And now here on the Central Coast, we're having a massive issue with that, because now we're lake frontage all over the place. People are now putting their homes up and having people come and stay there for a weekend, and they're making more money in that one weekend than they'll make in a week. So now we're seeing a massive crisis with tenants, long-term tenants, who are now finding themselves with nowhere to go, and they're ending up on the street. So the first thing I'd do would be roll back some of those changes and make sure that there is more affordable housing.
Sorry, as we move through this, we are over time, so I'll just ask everyone to be... I do like this question, so we'll proceed with it, but if we can just be quite succinct.
Housing, but we've got to think out of the box for sort of medium-term solutions, because we can't just build houses like that. It's obviously we're here to sort of advocate and push that message across, but as Micah had said, there are already spaces that are unused. sorry for the feedback. There are already spaces that are being unused. We need to look at how can we sort of repurpose those even for medium term. You have speakers coming up in a later session that will talk about solutions that they're working on, and that would be interesting to look at, a model that's already sort of up and running, and copy paste. We need more of that interim stuff while the long-term solutions are in the works.
And I would also like to reiterate what Ms Madigan and Mr Weeks has also said. We need more social housing. We currently have an additional 3,000 houses needed to house anybody on the wait list currently on the Central Coast. And also wanting to mention that what I would do is we can get social housing in a long-term fashion, but what are we doing right now? And I think there's a few things that we could be doing, such as abolishing no termination grounds. We could be investing in those properties that are vacant right now, turning any facilities into meanwhile properties. Thank you.
I think housing is one of the things, but I think we need to look at the holistic approach, because it's not just giving someone a house. You have to look at, can they afford that house, pay the rent, pay the electricity. Someone, a 55-year-old, getting a payment from Centrelink does not equal to what that rent and living requirements equal to. So I think we need to look at the whole holistic approach, not just house someone. We need to look at their government subsidising from Centrelink. We need to look at the infrastructure of medical centres available, GPs available in the area for them, and transport. Everything comes into housing that person, not just putting someone in a house. You have to look at the holistic approach and make sure that where you're housing them, there is all that stuff available. And the Commonwealth payment from Centrelink is not adequate for anybody, from being a young 18-year-old trying to pay rent to a 55-year-old who's taken on their grandchildren to try and decide whether I buy medication this week, or do I pay my electricity bill or my gas bill, or do I buy some food?
Thank you.
I'll be quick. Housing, obviously, is one of the things, but for me, I'm a bit of a strategic and policy, I'm a government-born person. My immediate thing is that I'd ask a government response from each agency to tell me exactly what they're doing to close the gap, for one, if I'm the Aboriginal, but another specific thing. However, the one thing that I would want to see is how are the government policies aligned to each other, because at the moment, from one agency to another, there is no wraparound, there is no bridge to link one policy or one access. There's no flow for somebody for a continuum. The other thing is too, I'd just like to say at the thing, so yes, I would be asking government to explain to me exactly how do they connect with each other and how we continue to allow somebody to progress as a continuum through supports, because at the moment a lot of them stop between one service to the next. There leads me to the next question. Aboriginal people across is considered just Aboriginal people at risk. There's no age specific to any one thing. For non-Aboriginal people, say it's over 65 plus, that's under that. New South Wales housing set for seniors living is only seen for a community housing provider as 65 plus. Not even recognising Aboriginal people, seniors living is from 50. You go to the My Aged Care system, that is 65 plus for supported services for non-Aboriginal people. You're getting my point here, is that there is a lot of changes that need to be taken away from this 65 plus. We're looking at over 55s. It's already clearly identified that this is a huge gap, and this is where people are entering the homelessness sector. So one thing that I'd be doing is checking the age accessibility for our current identified things that are impacting our community, our people. Sorry, that was all.
Thank you also very, very much for your time this morning. The committee has the opportunity to ask further questions. If they do so, or if you have taken anything on notice, which I don't think you have, you'll be informed by the Secretariat. You'll then have 21 days to respond to those further questions. Once again, thank you very much for your time. We are going to have a 15-minute break. I know we're a bit behind time, but so these guys can come up for air a bit, our support crew. We'll still have 15 minutes, which will see us back here at about 12:08. and then we'll steal some of our lunchtime so we get back on time. Thank you very much. If I've got some green lights, we might kick off our second session. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. We might kick off our second session. In doing so, I'll acknowledge the local member, the member for Wyong, David Harris, has joined us for this session. Thank you very much. In welcoming our next witnesses, I will ask that we go from left to right, if you guys are good to go, with name, title and an oath or affirmation, as I'm hoping has been provided to you. Oh, sorry, before we do, aware that a new batch of... We need to hit the button on our microphone before we speak. There's a little button just in front of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I, Jane Botel, solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I might also, because I did miss it if you did do it, just your name and title.
Mrs. Jane Botel, President of the Woy Woy CWA.
Thank you.
Andrew Conley, Policy Manager for CWA. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
My name's Deb Tipper. I'm the convener of Action for Housing of Older Women, and my affirmation is I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
My name's Carol Davidson. I'm a member of the Action on Housing for Older Women, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. I'll now open the floor to an opening statement, and if we can try and keep that as brief as possible, hopefully 2 minutes. As a bit of a guide, that's about a page and a bit. If you have a lengthy statement, we're happy to take that and it will still be incorporated into the Hansard that way. But if we can start with the CWA, if you'd like an opening statement.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair, Deputy Chair and committee members. The Country Women's Association of New South Wales makes 100 years marks 100 years this year. And housing supply, affordability, access and quality have been central to the advocacy work of the association over the years. Formed in 1922 to address isolation and lack of facilities in rural regional New South Wales, CWA of New South Wales members worked tirelessly to set up baby healthcare centres, fund health nurses, build staff maternity wards, hospitals, homes and many other types of community services. The housing issue has been of concern to the association for many years, and I guess the concerns of the association have changed as the housing needs have changed in New South Wales. In our submission to the inquiry, I'd like to point out that that submission comes from a resolution passed by the association, which is passed in a democratic process with over 8,000 members. So it comes forward from the membership, is then put to the AGM and passed. So the resolutions have focused on providing housing for older women and social and affordable housing, importantly. And I acknowledge the leadership of our committees and our branches, Jane here representing one of those branches, for their work that they've done in putting that together. Another area that I'd like to highlight, and I think that CWA really is focused passionately on, is the issue of domestic violence. And in 2020, the association co-hosted a summit with Domestic Violence New South Wales, focused on rural regional issues. And at that summit, a number of issues came out, and many of them focused on the issue of housing. Housing for people experiencing domestic violence, to give them a space, a safe space. As a part of this process also, I thought, because we can't all be here in front of you today, I spoke to the other branch who put together a submission to your committee. And speaking to them, I thought, what are the 3 things that you would like to say to the committee if you were sitting in front of them? And the first thing they said to me was, that homelessness is not a peripheral issue. It's a mainstream issue. And it's not an issue of casualties of lives off the rails. It's an issue that it can face any of us at any time. The second point they pointed out was that domestic and family violence is a really big issue for women in New South Wales and one of the reasons for homelessness in relation to those groups. And they point to a number of other committees that have been working, including the National Plan for Domestic Violence, that focuses on looking at strategies to address those issues. So specifically looking at older women and looking at the strategies that can support them. The last point that they raised was one about government, and it was one about looking at opportunities to think differently. Look at flexibility, look at experimentation, look at the opportunities that exist to reconceptualise the way in which we address this particular issue in communities. Sometimes accountability gets in the way of ingenuity. So the ways we have to report on funding or other kinds of programs can in fact actually stymie creativity and approach. So they raised programs like Finland's Housing First, changing the way we actually look at this and saying that housing is the major issue and then the other social issues will be fixed underneath that. So it's these points that they wanted me to speak about, and we thank you for the opportunity to be here before you.
Thank you very much. Another opening statement? Ms Tipper?
Thank you. Honourable Scott Barrett and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear at this important inquiry. I'd just like to refer, I've tabled a document which you may have or not, entitled Introduction to AHOW. Before I start, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Dark and Young people, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm here as the convener of an organisation called Action on Housing for Older Women, or AHOW. AHOW is a great example of unpaid local community action which is focusing solely on older women at risk of homelessness. For further information, I refer you to the document tendered. I think our AHOW is unique when compared to those who have already appeared before you in the last few days. We're a regional, unfunded advocacy and linking organisation, comprised of a network of organisational representatives, frontline workers and individuals with an interest in the well-being of older women. The group emerged from a recognition that no one on the Central Coast was focusing specifically on the issue of older women, despite the fact the reality was that they are one of the fastest growing cohorts of homeless people. A well-attended forum on the topic paved the way for the Central Coast to collectively focus on older women and homelessness. Incidentally, this forum was resourced by a charitable foundation, the Elderslie Foundation, with no government funding. Housing is fundamental to a person's safety, health, human rights, dignity and connection to community. We have a national crisis of housing for all ages. Within this crisis, we believe the situation for older women is critical and requires specialist responses, given that many older women experience the risk or actuality of homelessness differently from many others. For many women, this is their first experience of asking for help for themselves and for finding out about what services are available. This can be a bewildering and scary experience, often exacerbated by limited financial resources. Older women have to navigate what is a challenging service system to find affordable and safe housing options. We recognise the important place of existing housing programs, despite them not suiting many older women. However, we need a significant increase in the supply and diversity of dwellings and an expansion of existing support programs. We also need significant resources provided for a range of tailored solutions to explore and address the specific needs of older women at local and regional levels. In particular, we think we need a network of local support workers who can offer personal connection to assist women complete necessary applications and referrals to local services, to provide ongoing support to facilitate stability and address any complexity of their needs, and also to respond to local agencies and workers. We note calls by others before this inquiry and in their submissions for a specialist statewide information referral service focused on older women. We think that if this is created, it needs to really support regional areas in particular. AHA believes the best solutions arise from collaboration, which is supported through public and other resources. We've been able to work locally with other agencies to produce solutions with an ability to harness commitment and resources. The benefits of working in partnership between private, non-government and government are the creativity which emerges through conversation and collective experiences. Resources can be pooled. Voluntary contributions around specific projects are harnessed, and it's speedy action without the long bureaucratic processes which can slow ideas or halt projects. We're happy to discuss further examples of our work, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. I might start with Mr. Primrose, if that's okay.
I normally ask this question last, so I'll ask it first if I can, at the suggestion of the Chair. And that is, you may have heard me ask other witnesses, you wake up tomorrow morning and you're the Premier of New South Wales, okay? What's the very first thing that you would do to overcome, seek to alleviate, to address some of the issues that this inquiry is concerned about? Please be succinct. What will be at the very top of your agenda? And maybe I could begin with Ms. Tipper.
Thank you. Stock, as other people have said, we need housing stock. We need all sorts of housing stock. Not everyone needs the same stock. We've heard already various examples. I think we also need, ideally, I'd be actually Prime Minister and I'd change the income support for older women, for anyone on pension and benefits. So you need stock, you need freeing up of land, of spaces, incentives for people to offer their places for affordable housing. That'll do.
Thank you. Premier Davidson, do you have something that you'd put up?
I'd just like to add to that stock obviously takes a while. It takes, several years often to come about. And meanwhile, housing is definitely another option. If you can look at places that aren't being used for whatever reason and use them in a short period of time over the next 2, 3, even 5 years, in the meantime, getting the stock up to date.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, the joint premiers from the Country Women's Association. Can I ask what your position would be?
If I woke up tomorrow and was Premier, first of all, I'd have to remember that I was Premier and use my right title, I think. And then I would take an oh wow moment. I think we need more smaller housing. We need more transitional housing. We need housing that younger people can go into that leave home and don't want to share. We need to stop homelessness at, I don't use the word grassroots level. I think that we need to go deeper and we need to start at the seed of the problem. And so the seed is stopping homelessness in the first place, getting all organisations to talk to each other instead of being so autonomous. We are completely not autonomous. We engage with all the other not-for-profits, and I think as a Premier I would try and encourage all not-for-profits and government-funded organisations to work together and not be so autonomous, because by being so secular in their views, they're doing what they want to do, but sometimes it frays at the edges and we don't actually capture the whole homelessness situation. People on the ground like us that are not funded and don't have, we don't get government funding, we're not a service provider, but we've been on the coast for 90 years providing a service, and so we would love for the government agencies to come to us and look to us and ask us those sort of questions.
Thank you. Finally, Premier Connolly.
Housing stock is obviously an issue which I'm not going to address. If it's Premier, I think I'd actually try and flip and look differently at this issue. I mean, first of all, we need to look at some of the causal factors. I mean, for women, that's probably starts very, very early on in their life in terms of their life earning capacity, looking at the career paths they take, all of those kind of things. Now, as Premier, that's not going to address the issue today. But unless we begin to address the issues that build to this issue today, then we're going to continually have that same issue. So we need to look backwards, we need to look at the whole of life course. We then also need to address, as you've said, the thorny issue of housing stock. But at another level, there's also the capacity to identify. So who are these people? Because often women are hidden. They're couch surfing. They're actually in other people's homes because they need security. They need somewhere that they can sleep and stay, whether that's in a van and using other facilities to kind of maintain themselves. So where are they? How can we actually support them? And is that income support? Is that other kinds of support that we can provide? So looking at the whole person, looking at all the facilities that surround them, including, as Jane said, the not-for-profits, the service. We're not a not-for-profit. Well, we are a not-for-profit, but we're not a service provider. But we're deeply embedded in community. We deeply know the community, the people, the places, the services, who can go where to get what. And if it means helping out, then we help out. So I think for me, it's not just about housing stock. There is a whole big piece of work that needs to go as a community to support community.
Thank you.
Ms Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all of you for coming and for the amazing work that you do here on the coast. I wanted to pick up on that point about the women, as particularly older women, being sort of an invisible cohort of homeless people. We've heard on our first day of hearings, we heard from a number of women about the reluctance to go to a homelessness service in the first place, people not understanding what services are available, not wanting to use, sort of online or phone calls to link to home. And when I asked the government about this, they said that the department said that they really were geared towards giving help to people when they sort of received a request, and they didn't do outreach. They didn't do any sort of anything to find out who they were missing. And so I guess my question to you is, what should we be doing to ensure that we are reaching particularly older women who are in need of homelessness services? Perhaps I'll start with you, Ms Tipper.
Thank you for that question. A number of women who we've had contact with come through someone else, and I think Commissioner Robert Fitzgerald, the other day spoke very well about this issue, about there's usually an intermediary, and they get very few self-reporting in terms of the work that they do in the Commission for Ageing and Disability. He also pointed out about the paucity of advocates in the aged care system, particularly for people living in the community, as opposed to, he made the comparison with the disability sector where there is quite a network of advocates. I think that was a really important point, that somehow we need to shout it from the hills, if you like, that it's okay to ask for help, that help is there, like assistance, and there are options rather than staying in abusive situations, that you too are eligible for housing, emergency housing, even if it's not necessarily geared for you, like, refuges aren't necessarily suitable for older women and they don't really want to see themselves there. So we need to actually develop options for them to go to where they don't actually have to come off the street to get there. So I think it's about spreading the word, a campaign about that. I mean, ideally funding community-based advocates for older people, and I'd see that older women, of course, because that's our interest. Women have a history of often lack of assertiveness in asking for their own needs. Many women spend a lifetime looking after everybody else, and then suddenly, because often it's the first time they've needed services that aren't for their child or for the GP, outside the GPs, I think, and that's linked to economic. It's also linked to economic disadvantage and workplaces and all those sorts of things. We can't solve it all with one thing. I think we need to talk about it. We need to actually bring it out into the open that this is an issue. There's a large number of undocumented, homeless older people, not just women, but women are particularly less likely to go on the street because of safety. They've got particular personal safety issues. So as I think Robert Fitzgerald talked about, creating an environment where people can talk and people know that it's okay. And I thought that was really nicely spoken by him in terms of...
So just on that, and perhaps I could bring you in, Mrs. Botel. I note in the CWA submission there is a comment in there about the kind of lack of community spaces. So it makes me sound old, but back in the day, it was community centres in every suburb were quite normal. And do you think that, given the comments Ms. Tipper's just made about perhaps that gendered approach to seeking help, that older women would be more likely to go into a community sort of space to get that kind of help?
Totally agree with Ms. Tipper about what she's saying with the issue of women and homelessness. We have this, I think as a society, we have a perspective of homelessness, and that perspective has changed. It's now the hidden homeless, and we're talking to them all the time. I've got so many examples that I could share with you today. One at the top of my mind is a CWA member. And her comment to me yesterday was, I am one rent increase away from being homeless. Now, this woman has worked her whole life. She is single now, she is on an age pension, and she is fearful that she will have nowhere to go. And she has lived in this property for 10 years. Now, I don't have the answer for her, but what I do have is a safe environment for her to come and be listened to on a weekly basis. We operate every single Wednesday. We have nearly close to 60 members now. We are out in the community every single day. We're on the radio. We try and help as many people as possible, and as many other organisations. If you ring us up, we'll help you. We offer a safe environment. She knows that she can come to us. She knows that if she does turn around and she's homeless, she's got the support. And we will always embrace anybody that needs support. And I think it's very important, and like you say, that we do not have the senior citizen centres anymore. We don't have the drop-ins places that people used to go. Used to have senior citizens halls. Used to have people going and playing cards and backgammon, and they used to talk and they used to socialise. And that's what makes a community. And if those people can't come together, they sit at home and they get alone and they get lonely and then they get depressed. I've also got another woman that is in a 4-bedroom home that she owns. She lives alone and she doesn't even want to leave her front door now because she's been through 2 years of COVID. She's isolated, she's lonely. Why can't we need something where we can get these people together before they become homeless to maybe have some sort of shared housing and share the happiness. And so you stop the loneliness on one hand, you stop the mental anguish of somebody losing their home. If we could get some sort of a what was the word I used in my thing? I don't know. I've got so much here I could talk about. If we could try and set up a database of homeowners that are so lonely, but they can't move because their house is too big and they want to downsize, but they can't afford the downsized home, and there isn't enough small housing anyway. So then they're stuck in this big home when they're lonely, and so I'm getting off topic. But I agree that we, as a CWA, that is a not-for-profit, we don't offer a service. What we offer is a safe environment and a place that has stood the test of time. It's 100 years old. We've been on the community down in that hall at Woy Woy for 90 years, and we have grown with the Woy Woy community from when it was built on a dirt road, and now we have grown with that. And what our community needs, that's what we adapt to. And I think we need more places like that, so that then places like Ms Tipper's organisation can ring us up, or we can ring her, and we can say, look, I've got this situation. We need to all work more together, I think, and that's my take on that question.
Thank you. Reverend Knight.
A number of submissions have stressed the problem in New South Wales is the shortage of affordable rental housing, particularly in regional and rural areas. As we discuss this important issue, it should be noted, as I'm sure everybody is aware of it, regional and rural areas already have the advantage of greater availability of land. If the government would only release more land for development and combine it with the proposed housing models outlined, for example, in alternative housing models for previously housed older Australians report, would this not go far to solving a great deal of the social housing shortage and homelessness?
Is that directed at me?
It's an open statement to the panel.
Okay, I'd like to say that I think that not speaking from in a regional perspective, but in our, I suppose we are a large regional centre, what I think would be great for us is more small affordable homes for people that suddenly find themselves single, over 55 and unable to afford their current rent. Integrated housing, I think, is so important. I don't think we should build purpose-built social housing. They have to be integrated within private rental complexes so that self-worth and dignity are not compromised and they feel more part of their local community. So coming from the area that we see and that we are in, I keep coming back to the smaller homes, which is really important, and land on the Central Coast, from what I believe, is virtually non-existent. So that's a problem in our area. I'm not sure about other regional areas, but I'm sure that Andrew probably has a bit more to say on that. Do you? Oh, I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess, I mean, for me, there's also the issue of, and Jane touched on it, community. There's no point in providing a house if the person's taken outside of all the social community structures that they know. So we have to provide housing in the spaces where people are comfortable and live, and their social cohesion is maintained. So just using land that's available, creating houses or dwellings, I don't think is the answer. Of course, I'm not saying don't build more houses, so don't take me wrong, but I think focusing more on the people and their needs, connecting them, community cohesion is important. The other thing that, just even touching back on the previous comment, was where do these people gather? Where do they feel safe in being? So what is the ecosystem that they live in, and how can we connect with them so that they feel comfortable in those connections? And once we've got them, and if it is a CWA hall, if it is other spaces, then we can start looking at where we build the houses, so responding to need. And as Jane's already said, there are houses that have got lots of rooms. There are other spaces where there's no rooms. So maybe it's actually looking at kind of like, I don't know, I'm not Premier anymore, so I step back, but just how can we manage all of those complex issues? So yes, we need more housing, but I don't think that's only it.
Thank you. Ms Jackson.
Thank you. I have two questions. I'll start with my question to you, Ms Tipper and Ms Davidson. I wanted to ask about, based on your experience, the work that you've done, those key moments that sort of tip someone into a crisis. So, look, we know that there are issues with women's income over their lifetime. Those are challenging issues. A lot of them, relate to sort of federal government areas, and we live in a society that still doesn't properly value women's work. That's a big change we need to make. We've talked a little bit about some of the crisis stuff, but just those moments, Ms Botel mentioned maybe a rent increase, that are just pushing women into that sort of crisis situation. I just want to get an understanding of that so that we might then think about, you know, how to try and prevent that incident from occurring.
Thank you. I've got 2 examples from women I've had experience with linking into housing. One is a woman who was renting in the private sector, and her belief is that the owner wanted to force her out without giving her notice. So there were tenants moved in upstairs, so that was a 2-story thing, and she was harassed constantly, and to the point where her anxiety rose. She was like a 70-plus-year-old woman, and she was stopping eating, she was anxious, she was crying, she was going through all the symptoms of someone seriously upset about life. And she had her daughter was able to support her, which was good, but she couldn't move in with her daughter. Her daughter lived in a 1-bedroom place. So for her, it became a health crisis for her because of the harassment that was going on. The police had been called, but nothing actually happened to solve that problem. So we were able to link her in with other people, and she was eventually actually housed through Pacific Link. So she was one example. So that was a tipping point. Harassment, which had a severe impact on her health. There's another woman who we were showing her accommodation, and that was through our network of people. It was actually a referral through Baptist Care, who have specific workers focused on older people. And we were standing there in the middle of this unit, and she just said, out of the blue, with 2 strangers with her, I didn't believe she'd ever do it. And she then proceeded to talk about her daughter, and it was elder abuse, and it was financial abuse, and they essentially had ripped her off big time. Money that she'd in trust put into the house, her and her husband had put in, they were sharing the house and all that, but she realised that there was a whole lot of money that was not was not hers anymore. She didn't even know who the solicitor. It's a complicated story, but there was a solicitor involved with money, investment money, and she didn't even know who the solicitor was to go and talk about what had happened. Elder abuse is an increasing issue that's impacting, and it is even harder for many women to move out of that situation because of the shame. They feel incredible shame about their children doing this, and it's often their children who are actually doing this, and it's often financial. It's not only financial, but... So that was another tipping point where she finally dawned on her, and I suspect she'd been thinking about it for a while and getting the messages, and ultimately she didn't leave. I'm not sure what happened. I think it's like any abusive situation. It takes more than one time attempt to leave an abusive relationship, and I suspect this was an abusive relationship that was even harder to leave. So that's 2 examples of tipping points.
Thank you, Ms Tipper. My second question, before I throw to my other colleagues, is to Mrs Botel, and I just wanted to ask, perhaps you don't have a view on this, but it prompted me to ask this question, you know, the comment that you'd made about some older people living in properties that are sort of too large for them, not wanting to move, you know, the sort of the hassle and the expense of that. One suggestion that I've previously heard is amendments to the age pension that would allow someone to live in a dwelling with someone else without there being a disadvantage on the pension. So I wondered whether that, in terms of some of the kind of creative different solutions to just building more housing, which we should do but is expensive and time consuming, is that the type of thing that maybe we should be looking at? Because I understand currently there's a penalty on your pension if you have someone move into the property with you, whereas if that were to be removed, that might encourage more people who are on a pension and in larger properties to have someone, a friend or an associate, come and stay with them.
Thank you for that question. That was one of the notes that I had here, that since COVID, we have seen an increased number of over 55s, but especially those over 70 and in their 80s, that live in their own home but by themselves and feel such utter loneliness. Could we set up what I've just called it this for the sake of calling it something, a shared beginnings database that homeowners living alone and with space can opt in for a housemate, and the other person who rents and is worried about possible future loss of housing can opt in to, then a relevant body could mediate, and it means that those two difficult situations could be alleviated. But that point of not losing the pension is very important, because I know that the lady I'm referring to in my previous statement was, she's in private rental and has been for those 10 years, but she is so worried. Now, if we could stop her from becoming homeless at the next rent increase and facilitate her being in a shared situation with somebody, I think it would be awesome. But it needs to be, I don't know what the model would look like. It's just these ideas. And I also have this other idea that it got me thinking about landlords. Now, this lady's landlord has, her previous landlord had owned the place for X amount of years, and she had good rental, didn't put it up, he was a really nice person. The second one's come along, he's put it up, and he won't give her any more than 12-month lease. Could we have some sort of a compassionate clause and a scheme for landlords that choose to rent to a pensioner? So you say, right, I'm going to rent to a pensioner because I know they've got set income. I know that they're not going to not be able to pay. But by signing up that pensioner, I'm going to, the compassionate clause in that is that I will rent to that person and not give them a rent increase for, say, for the next 5-7 years as a compassionate landlord, because I've got a long-term tenant being a pensioner. Because let's face it, the pensioners don't want to pack up and leave. So maybe we could introduce, and if you're bandy, maybe if you could say we'll give you a tax break. Well, landlords, they'd jump at that maybe. I'm just trying to think outside the whole box of how we currently work, and that sort of came to me as well. So I hope that's answered your question. I do believe that if the fear of losing some of their pension is what stops them cohabitating, I didn't know that was an issue.
Pippa, did you want to add anything on that?
Yes, thank you. We currently have a funding, we don't have funding grant because we're unincorporated. We have to partner with another organisation. So we've partnered with the Central Coast Community Women's Health Centre on and received funding through the Mercy Foundation to investigate the options for women wanting to rent together and to look at safe places and models for how they meet using the Community Women's Health Centre spaces, because we've got 3 across the coast. And so that's actually looking at how that might work, and it's about affordability. We've talked also about the private owners who have spare rooms and how that might extend. That's a bit more complex, but it's certainly something we as a group have discussed and had that idea about. That's another way of sort of trying to find stock that's there and overcome the whole lot of the social issues about loneliness and things. So that is an example of we've just employed a worker who's started this week, I think. So it's very early days, but that is something we're exploring. And I think it's a good example of the innovation that can come from people on the ground. Thank you.
We might go for another 5 minutes or so because we did start a bit late. Mr. Mullard, you had a question, but was it?
Yeah, fortunately, or fortunately, we're thinking similarly here. I was thinking down the same line as you are in terms of the answers of the diversification of housing and people sharing together to address loneliness. And I've seen reports in Scandinavia, and I think also Japan, where students, a student can live with an older person, share a house, and there's a different type of dynamic there, and obviously you vet the person. But would that sort of model, would you consider that sort of model to address loneliness and also accommodation issues?
I think that would be awesome. I think it's intergenerational contact is good for both parties. Yeah. You know, you've got older people can teach younger people younger people can teach older people without even them teaching them anything. It's just living together and being in the same environment. We have so many lonely grandparents out there that children have moved overseas and they're probably longing to have somebody come and live with them. And if we could facilitate that, I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's a broad, it encompasses so much of what we're talking about today, that it's a great model, and I think it takes me back to that TV show where they had all those kids go into the nursing home. It's that same sort of thing, and it's covering a lot of issues, and I think it would be a really worthwhile, and we would embrace that. We would love to sort of do that as a CW. Like we're into everything at Woy Woy. We don't mind what we dip our toes into. Come up with an idea, we'll run with it, and so we're happy to work with as many other organisations as possible, because I think we all have to work together. It's the only way we're going to try and, achieve something.
Do you think, Ms Tipper, do you think that's an innovative approach?
Thanks. Look, it's being trialled in various places. Lake Macquarie has, just north of here, has an example of that at the moment. It's not long-term, it's about stabilising, I think their model is about stabilising young people who are out of work, and they're actually, I think it's a period of 3 to 6 months or something. It's not a long term, and the young people don't pay rent, so it's not the same sort of model that we're talking about. But there's a lot of examples around the place of such things. Students are used often in, I think in Wollongong, around Wollongong Uni, students can go and live with older people and do a certain amount of support work.
If you were able to lay your hands on some specific information about those two programs and give it to us on notice, that would be appreciated.
I could try.
Thank you.
Yep.
I might close it out. There's only a couple of minutes, so I might ask you to be quite specific. We've heard a lot of constant themes throughout this is our third hearing. I wonder, can you be, again, quite specific about some of the differences between the issues you face or the advantages you face being in a regional area versus being in the metro areas, this being our only regional hearing, so you're sort of speaking on behalf of the rest of the state, and we'd be quite specific about the differences between regional areas and metro areas.
I'll start with just one comment. Talking to our Bangalore branch yesterday, one of the issues they raised was the fact that they're talking about trying to house quite high earning people. There are no houses for them. So in regional areas, it's not necessarily as easy as it is. There's not as much housing stock, I guess. So really travelling 100 kilometres away for somebody working at a hospital is just not workable if they're working long hours. So this person's trying to find that person accommodation. So in regional areas, I think there are some very different issues in relation to this available stock, the competition in terms of what people can pay.
The Central Coast has over 1,000 square kilometres. Distance is significant, and as Andrew Connolly was talking about earlier, the importance of maintaining existing contacts that you have and support services. You could live in Toukley and end up being suggested you go and live in Woy Woy. Now, you may as well live in Timbuktu, because the distances and the support services that you're used to and perhaps have had for many years are not there. The Central Coast, we've got a massive shortage of GPs. Even to connect with a new doctor is a major challenge. So for an older person who will be needing GPs, because they're higher users of GPs, to find a new GP in a new area where you know no one, you can't walk down the street and say hello to anyone that you know even. So I think regional areas, the advantage is that we can connect with each other in terms of services. We see each other as, a network facing the same issues. And the Central Coast, that's really strong, because over the decades, we've been overlooked between Sydney and Newcastle. So we've got a strong identity. But in terms of the services, the distance and the cost of travel, and we have a population that has a lower average income than many places in Australia, so people, and a poor public transport system. So the ability to move around is really restricted by the characteristic of our region. And I think that for the Central Coast really impacts on us.
Thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. It's been very insightful, and we thank you for the efforts that you've made. There is the opportunity for committee members to ask further questions. If they do so, or if you have suggested you take something on notice, the Secretariat will be in touch with you and you'll have 21 days to respond to that. To everyone else, we will be back here at 12:45, at 1:30 to start our next session. Thank you very much. So yeah, welcome back to the final session, the final afternoon, and welcome to our next witnesses. Starting from my left, can each witness please state their title and name and swear either an oath or affirmation.
Thank you. My name's Melanie Smith. I'm the Director of Community and Recreation for Central Coast Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
And I'm Mr Glenn Callard. I'm the Unit Manager of Community and Culture at Central Coast Council, and I also solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now would we like to make an opening statement, hopefully quite a brief opening statement.
Thank you. The Central Coast has a homelessness problem that requires immediate action. Central Coast Council has invested in an affordable housing strategy. However, there are some areas where we have limited capacity on our own to make a meaningful impact, such as addressing the affordable housing shortage and easier access to services. This requires a collaborative effort from all partners in the sector and for all levels of government to commit funds and appropriate resources to provide the help needed for older people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Low-income earners may be eligible for social housing, but applicants have an approximate wait list time of 10 years. Partnerships with the private sector and/or increased requirements placed on developers to provide affordable housing would significantly assist in addressing the housing shortfall. The Central Coast has the second highest rate of family and domestic violence in the state. According to those working in this sector, there is a growing need to supply housing for women over 55 years old who may be leaving violent households with little income and capital to support future accommodation and lifestyle needs. There's also an increased incidence of silent homelessness among employed people who cannot afford or find suitable housing. We need better cohesion among existing services so that it's easier for older people to access what is already available. Tell your story once to one person to get the help needed. Navigating multiple agencies and layers of bureaucracy, together with the stigma about homelessness, is a barrier for many older people seeking services. Council proposes an integrated and better resourced approach to service referral and delivery, a one-stop shop of services, a single hub including support in seeking rental accommodation, access to case management services, telephone advice lines, internet, laundry and shower facilities, just a few of the services. Community hubs have proved to be a successful model in other situations such as natural disaster recovery. Over a 5-year period from 2011 to 2016, there's been a 35% increase in the rates of homelessness on the Central Coast. If we continue to approach this issue in the same way for another 5 years, the risk is that homelessness will increase and impact thousands more older people. Council stands willing to be a key partner to pilot a hub model for services for older people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We might see if we can slip that statement across to Hansard just to make it a bit easier for them, if that's okay. They'll come and grab it from you. Ms Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for coming along and giving us your evidence today. We heard a little bit earlier about how there is, the Central Coast does end up with people coming from other regions when they are homeless, either to try and use the homelessness services here or simply because it is a marginally better place to be homeless than some other places. Is there also a kind of, I guess, another factor that increases homelessness here on the coast in terms of incidences of people being kicked out of housing during sort of seasonal influx of tourists. Can you talk to us about the impact of that?
There is anecdotal evidence to suggest that because it is a seasonal sort of holiday destination and a tourism destination, that you know, around those peak seasons, the rental sort of market shrinks. So to accommodate higher, you know, they're able to get higher rentals in those particular periods in time. So that would be accurate.
Something we haven't heard much about in this inquiry at all is the impact of the growing cost of retirement homes and the behaviour of some retirement homes in, you know, kicking out residents before refurbishing or whatever. Is that an issue on the Central Coast? Is there a lack of affordable retirement accommodation?
My understanding is there is a significant shortage of affordable retirement accommodation on the Central Coast. So, for example, if you think about the aged care pension, it's less than $500 a week. If you're looking at a one-bedroom unit or accommodation in a retirement village, they're approximately around about $300 to $320 a week. So you're taking out the lion's share of someone's pension, which reduces their capacity to survive or to provide other things that they might need.
A final question, then I'll pass over. When we had the last panel in front of us, they were talking about this kind of gradual erosion of community spaces, places where people feel that they can go because it's not owned by a private corporation, it's not enclosed, it's a community space. And we know that across Australia we've seen that sort of reduction in community-owned spaces. Do you think, I guess, could you comment on the reduction of community spaces on the Central Coast over the last 20 years, perhaps, you know, sort of a long-term, but also whether you think that has impacted that on a kind of lack of community cohesion and finding people who are homeless in our community?
Can I just clarify what you mean by community spaces?
So whether it be community centres, libraries, parks, areas where people come together to, you know, sort of on an informal basis, I guess, because they know that there's going to be people that they know there who may or may not have links to the services in the area.
My response to that is I'm not necessarily sure that there's been a reduction in the amount of community spaces. It's about the changing use of those spaces that may have had an impact. So there's also been significant increases on the Central Coast of younger families or, you know, that cohort coming in. So the spaces are changing in how they're being used, more so than there being a significant reduction in the spaces.
Thank you.
Reverend Knight?
Just a general question, how could
Can you hit the mic there, Peter?
assist elderly people before they are at risk of homelessness? Yeah, sorry. How could your organisation help people before they are at the risk of homelessness?
I see council's role as being a role of facilitating the specialist organisations that work in that area to come together. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think one of the models that works quite well across a number of different areas is a hub model. So I see council's role as facilitating those specialist agencies to maybe form some sort of hub where it's a one-stop place for people to seek help. And it's about encouraging those services and helping those networks to grow and reach the broader community.
Ms Jackson.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions, some of which lead on from my colleague Ms Boyd's questions. Just on the issue of short-term letting, as she indicated, there is, and through your response, there is quite a lot of evidence that areas which have a larger short-term letting market because they're attractive for people to come and holiday, do experience additional rental stress. Some councils have sort of explored different ways that they might play a sort of regulatory role to try and limit the impact of that. Is that something that this council has explored? And, if so, has any of that been successful, I guess?
It isn't something that we have explored at this point in time.
Okay. I mean, has that been for a particular reason, or it's not as though you... Yeah, I guess I'm just interested in the role local government might play at that level.
It's a complicated space because you're in the private property market. So, look, we're well aware that it's an issue. It's an issue across a number of, particularly our major seaside suburbs, where it doesn't just affect homelessness, it affects the rental market in general, because often those houses are kept as primary as investment properties or holiday houses. They're often been old stock, like old fishermen's cottages and things that have been in the families for years. So they tend to only be let on short term, even through the private rental market. And it does create a churn in some of our suburbs where people will move in there and temporarily while they can find more permanent rentals. So it is an issue across a lot of the coast of New South Wales, where you've got that same dynamic, but it's a very complicated one for councils to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Secondly, just on the issue of the role that community spaces might play to link people up to services. Again, Ms Boyd was asking about the availability of those spaces. I mean, that's partly because older people, particularly older women, maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable going to more traditional homelessness service spaces, but places like the community centres that do exist, libraries also a big one where you might find people who are at risk coming in. Do you provide any particular training or support or resources to people who are working for, say libraries that the council runs, or other kind of community services that aren't explicitly homelessness services, but might actually identify people who need support or need assistance navigating other services that are available?
Look, the answer is yes, we do, and we also work with to facilitate a lot of other programs that I suppose intersect with that space. So someone might have been Deb Tipper before, who spoke about elder abuse as an example. So we've worked with state-funded local community organisations on those sort of programs, where we've provided our staff and our libraries and our senior centres to both support people but also to look for those signals. So yes, we do where we can. We do what we can where we can. Often though, people don't necessarily, it's like the general nature of disadvantage. It's often difficult to tell from a physical observation, and people don't necessarily present in a way that allows intervention. So we need to be really careful of people's privacy, and but if people come forward, we do have protocols in our organisation. Absolutely we do, to assist people. It doesn't matter whether it's for homelessness or any other form of disadvantage.
I might just ask one more question now and then see if colleagues have others, and come back to me if there's time. One area that we've heard a little bit about is the opportunity for meanwhile use of properties, because, yes, we need more social and affordable housing, but that takes time and money. Councils potentially have a role to play there in terms of change of use applications via DAs. Something was something, and people, want to use it as meanwhile use for temporary accommodation. Does the council have any, perhaps it was part of that affordable housing strategy that you mentioned or something like that, any kind of particular effort to ensure that if there is an opportunity for meanwhile use that does require, for example, a DA for change of use, that is expedited or looked at or encouraged?
Look, again, yes, we do. I wouldn't say that's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that was identified through our alternate and affordable housing strategy. So we have a plethora of granny flats across the coast. Some, some properly constructed, some not. We're well aware of, the large number of those. So we've got guidelines and things in place to help people understand how that can happen as quickly as possible. Like, just as another example, we've repurposed some council cottages, so we've actually fixed them up ourselves as a pilot program, and we've linked with Pacific Link, who Ian and Daphne were here before. So we actually provide those into their stock. So we're using some of our own assets to try and put back into the community. We took those off the private rental market and have put them back in there, and we're gradually expanding that process as we can repair some of our cottages. So, I think as a council we're relatively proactive, and we have got a relatively comprehensive strategy, but I think, as Mel said, to start with, we're only part of the solution, and I think that if there's things that we can do when people come forward, we absolutely try and work in partnership to get that outcome.
Thank you.
I just will mention, I do have copies of the affordable and alternative housing strategy here for all of you, if you would like a copy.
You pass that through the clerks there. We've got about under 15 minutes left. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Mallard does, and we'll try and get back to Ms. Primrose as well. I'll ask this question as representatives of council. If you're not the right person, feel free to take it on notice. Throughout this hearing, we've heard a lot about the human impacts of homelessness, which absolutely should be the number one priority, and is. But I just wonder, as representatives of council, what are some of the other impacts on a council of homelessness in the area, particularly a regional council?
Look, that's a very good question, and it's a very extensive range of impacts, I suppose, it has on council. We're happy to probably take that on notice and come back with a comprehensive response, because through our strategy we have looked at as many, I suppose, opportunities where council services and staff intersect with the community in this space and what we can do to assist. So it may be better that we come back with a broad based answer which gives some examples of what we've done with our ranges and our compliance areas and those sort of things, because they're often not what people see as the front line of these areas, but they're very incredibly important spaces.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mallard?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for letting us your facilities today, and thank you for your evidence. So, a bit like my colleague Rose Jackson, I've got a background in local government, and different councils have different levels of engagement in this space. So I was interested to hear you say that, I think I heard you say you have some housing stock. So just outline the council's practical position on this issue. Do you have an officer that's in charge of the issue of homelessness on your council? Has the previous council, when it was here, proactive in terms of trying to find affordable housing for people that are homeless in the community, and in regards to encouraging development applications of boarding houses or types of accommodation, or even pursuing levies to in terms of they call them development agreements to try and achieve some more housing. Are those some of the objectives you're doing at this council?
Yes is the answer. I suppose to all of the above to some degree. We do have a dedicated affordable housing officer, so that was an outcome and a resolution of council when the strategy was adopted. It's only one staff member, but it's still a critical resource that we have. So they tend to work across, to some degree, the three broad spectrums of the housing strategy. So one was around the planning area and planning controls, because that's often a significant lever, and certainly is in our area where we don't have our greenfield sites, or our ability to make change in the future is limited to certain locations, which often aren't where services are. So, as numerous people have mentioned already today, we're a complicated geographical area, and we're long established, and we've got a road network that, in many ways goes back many decades and doesn't currently reflect where we are. we've got complex public transport needs. So a main part of our strategy was around what planning controls and levers we could use there. That there has been, that was complex because we're under 2 former LEPs, so we've only recently got a consolidated LEP across the LGA, so we are starting to move more into that space now and in our broader housing strategy. We had another area which was around our own intervention and what we can do. So in addition to just providing our own assets to put into the market, and we're continuing along that approach, we've also identified large parcels of land that council own, which we are happy to engage with the sector to try and provide opportunities for development. So these spaces are in the critical areas, so they're in the middle of our main urban spaces where services exist, where public transport exists, where the networks that you talk about, community facilities and those things are there. So we are heading down that space at the moment. So we've got a trial site at the entrance which can have quite a large development on, which we hope to see something on the ground in the next 6 to 12 months there. And the last thing that we've worked on through our strategy is a partnership-based approach, which is where we work with the sector to try and, get some outcomes that, I suppose, work with them in partnership to see what can happen from a homelessness perspective.
Work with CHPs.
Work with the CHPs, the housing providers that you've seen here today, and a lot of the smaller community groups. Like I know that I think Micah might have raised the issue before, but our topography is really complicated, and we have a myriad of really small charities and groups, church-based groups like Coast Hands, that are doing amazing work in 1 or 2 localised suburbs. So we try and do what we can to help across the spectrum with the resources we've got, but I think, as Mel said, we see our role really as a facilitator or a supporter, apart from the direct intervention things we can do. We certainly try and work with the sector to get some outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Primrose.
I just have 2 questions, if I can. I mean, one of our terms of reference is to look at the adequacy of the collection of data on older people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I'm wondering, as a local government, how adequate you find the current data that's available to you on the numbers and types of people who are homeless, and if there is a problem, if you have any suggestions as to how that might be overcome.
The data that we rely on is the census data and the Department of Communities and Justice data. So when they do their homeless counts and those sorts of things, doesn't necessarily mean it's reliable data. And I think one of the other things about homelessness that's important to note too is there's a proportion of people that are homeless or sleeping rough, for example, couch surfing or sleeping in their cars with families, that don't necessarily show up on the count. So I'm not convinced that the data is reliable, is the answer to the question.
Any suggestions as to what may be done to help overcome that? And I know it's not your problem, but what would make it more reliable, and useful to you in terms of data?
Wow, that's a very difficult question to answer.
Please feel free to take it on notice.
Yeah, certainly.
Could I ask you another one?
I would
So,
be
did you want to answer that question, Ms Smith, or take that one on notice?
I'd be happy to take that one on notice and come back to you with a bit more thought behind it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Reverend Nile and then see if we can get back to you, Ms Jackson. Peter, can you hit his mic?
Our housing strategy, and congratulate the council on their objective. And I'm just wondering, how successful are you in ensuring this strategy is carried out, that any new public housing is a mix of public, private and affordable homes? That seems to me to be a very high target to achieve. How successful are you in achieving it?
You're talking about public housing, Reverend Nile. I think we work with the relevant government agencies really well in that space, and as I said before, we're looking to develop our own mixed-use developments with community housing providers, and they will absolutely have a mix of affordable public social housing that can be used for temporary accommodation. So again, where we have the levers, we totally do that. There hasn't been a whole heap of new housing stock at all on the Central Coast for an extensive amount of time. I think Ian might have spoke about some transition of properties from the state into the CHPs, but apart from a couple that I'm aware of which predated the strategy, there hasn't been a whole heap of new developments for us to have input into. But as I said, the ones that we're currently pursuing ourselves in a partnership approach, they will absolutely meet that requirement.
Thank you.
Ms Jackson, did you want to last couple of minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I just had one last question, which was, again, some councils in sort of response to some of the service, sort of homeless issues that they're seeing have looked at investing in things like mobile showers and laundry facilities. I wondered whether Central Coast Council had done that, and, sort of if you have, was there any sort of resourcing available from government to support that, or if you haven't, is part of the reason that those kind of things cost money, and you'd have to make that space within your budget to provide that service?
So the answer is a bit of that we've done. We're looking at a program at the moment. We're trying to change the nature and the opening hours of some of our key areas, our public toilet blocks, in relation to where some of the needs are. We certainly work with like the local shopping centres and some of our community centres to try and support that. We do have a few groups locally that provide mobile shower services and mobile laundry services. It isn't necessarily a space for council, as I think you might have acknowledged, to provide those services, but we're certainly doing what we can to facilitate that. A lot of what we have is the nature of our area is so broad that people tend to be in small pockets in a multitude of spaces. So, I'd like to acknowledge the work like that HOTS and those groups have done, because that ability to be mobile and to connect with people where they are has been a huge step forward, even though the problem is certainly increasing, as we all know, everywhere. But we do have some really modern approaches locally and some fantastic services that are able to go out into those areas. So our role's probably more to support people to do that, and we've had grant programs and funding streams where we're more than happy to have conversations about how we can help facilitate that sort of infrastructure more.
Thank you so very much for your time this afternoon. Very much appreciated. The committee does have the opportunity to ask further questions. If they do, the Secretariat will be in touch. Likewise, I think there was a couple of things taken on notice. We thank you for that additional information also. You'll have 21 days you'll get a formal notification of those things from the Secretariat, so thank you very much for that. We're going to have a quick 15-minute break. Be back here at 2:15. The next session's a little bit different. We're doing a bit of a roundtable discussion. We've got two people coming forward for that, so it'll be more of an informal discussion rather than the formal setup that we've seen so far. So we'll be back at 2:15. Right, we might look to kick this off. This is a bit of a different session we're trying here. We're going for more of a roundtable discussion. We look to get a few more people, but we're very appreciative that the two of you are here. This is going to be more of a relaxed feel, hence we're sitting here. We've got Shane, Scott, Abigail, Rose, Peter, Taylor and Chris, all here to learn from you guys. So we've got Adam and Jim, which sort of gives us the bookends of our inquiry, which is hearing from people with lived experiences, which is very important to us to understand what's going on. If at any time you feel uncomfortable or awkward, let me know and I can shut it down, or feel free just to leave at any time. We appreciate you being here, and we're very grateful for everything you've put forward. So I'll just get you just pull the microphones a bit closer to yourself, hit the button on the front.
There we go.
There we go. That looks to have fixed it. Are we good to go again? Righto, so actually ignore what I just said about pointing the microphone closer to you. I might just kick off with a couple of questions, and then as people have more to ask, we'll go along that line. Now, I'll start with you, Adam, if I can, and we were just chatting briefly. Could you just tell everyone how, one of the messages we're getting is that anyone, homelessness can happen to anyone, and we just wondered whether you could tell your story of how you ended up in that situation.
Well, basically, I was driving trucks in Sydney. The dreaded Sydney traffic, I reckon, fried most of my poor brain. I also had major gambling problem when I was in Sydney, and it came one fateful Saturday. I went and spent me wages, couldn't pay me rent, didn't go home, and started living in my car. Left a job, everything, left Sydney. I think that was one of the best things I could ever do for my brain. And then I found Coast Shelter, and it was Charles that I struck up a really good relationship with. He got me into the refuge with this guy here. He rang me on my birthday, actually. Said we got a spot in a refuge. 8.5 months in a refuge, and now I'm with Pacific Link. I was in a place at Yamina for the last, I think, 18, maybe more months. And they've just moved me, and they've moved me into a brand new building in Gosford. So that's sort of the short of where I've gone and got to. And the help that I got from Coast Shelter, basically when I landed in Gosford in my car, was just unbelievable.
Adam, at that point, did you consider yourself homeless? Like, was there a realisation that you're in trouble, or where did you...
No,
how did you feel at that point, I guess?
Well, at the start of the living in the car, I would have considered, looking at it now, practically insane from gambling. I used to question my own behaviour, and I just thought I was losing my mind completely. Like, why do I keep going and shoving $1,000 in a poker machine on a Thursday night? And I had a really, really bad feeling of myself, if I can describe it that way, like of my self-worth. And yeah, when you opt to live in your car, and you start living in your car in the clothes you were wearing when you went to the pub, it was awful hard.
How did you find Coast Shelter? How did you hook up with those guys?
True good people. Just, yeah, like, I'd say Coast Shelter are better people than the majority of my family.
How did you land up here? How did you land up here in the Central Coast?
Well, basically, I left Sydney, and because I come from the coast, I come back up. I've got a couple of cousins out of 26 cousins that I do talk to, and like coming to the coast would have been me sort of coming to somewhere familiar, safe. You know, fair enough, I was living on the waterfront in my car, but it still felt like I know where I am on hometown type thing.
I think, how did you go from living in your car to connecting with Coast Shelter? Like, how did that connection happen?
Because I was doing a daily walk from the waterfront up to the restaurant, Charles, and I saw people nod when I said him before, Charles is like a legend as far as I'm concerned of Coast Shelter, who's just recently retired. I connected really well with him when I first got there. And he basically got me in touch with Steve, who runs the refuge that these guys are from. And like I said in that bit at the start, it was, 8.5 months in the refuge. And then the refuge connected me with Pacific Link. I'm now in assisted housing.
Did you want to...
I just wanted to pick up on that. Was me nodding about Charles. I knew we would hear about Charles today. I know Charles.
Mm.
He has done excellent work, and I've only just learnt now that he's retired, which is great for him, but it's a big loss for the Central Coast.
But even what he's retired to, he's going over to the Philippines to do exactly the same thing.
That's him.
So he's a legend.
Jim, some of your story. How did you get to be homeless, I guess, and then how have you progressed through that?
Well, I became homeless because I couldn't move back to my place at Lightning Ridge. While I was trying to load my ute up to do that, I had an accident and pulled my leg apart, did a fair bit of damage to that. Ended up in hospital. They did a great job. They thought I'm okay now, I can look after myself. Sorry. And did my best. Went down to my sister's place for a little bit of recovery. Things didn't work out quite well there because she's a little bit, overbearing. So I ended up in my car, and I had a really bad cataract problem. Well, legally blind. And it was very, very hard to get around in the car. I didn't mind the car so much. I've spent most of my life as a long-distance truck driver. I used to sleep in trucks and done a lot of camping. No big deal to me, apart from the access to shower and toilet and things like that, which I used to find regularly anyway. There's always a way. And I was advised by some people to approach Coast Shelter to see if I could get some help with my vision. And when I did, I encountered Penny. It was an absolute angel. And Charles, again. Very, very good people. Anyway, they sort of took me under their wing and organised some people to fix my eyes. Then Steve from Coimbra got involved and said, mate, you can't live in your car with your eye patch stuff. You just can't do this anymore. I said, I'll be okay, I've got a little stove and I've got a jug. I'm all right. No, we'll look after you. So Coimbra took control of me then and put me into some accommodation, which I'm very, very grateful for. They've done an absolutely outstanding job, these guys. But it all gets back to Penny and her help in the beginning to initiate it.
So have you... Sorry. Use the microphone. So have you now got permanent housing, or are you... Yes. So
I'm told it's permanent until we can make some other arrangements. It was meant to be very temporary, but they've seen my issue, my problems at the moment, and tended to me very well.
Yeah, good. And Adam, your place in Gosford, is that now permanent for you?
Yeah, well, what it should be, as far as I know, it's my forever home now.
Glad to hear it.
Could I ask you both, what is your source of income now? What type of government support is
DSP.
it? What's that?
DSP.
Disability support, and you're on disability support too?
No, I'm still on New Start. I'm actually, me and Josh here are in the process of trying to lodge a DS.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Can I just ask, if you don't mind, are you able to touch on a bit more about the support you're able to get in relation to gambling? Would you be able to tell us a bit more about it?
Oh, yeah, well, at the moment I see Roger Matheson, who was basically continuing counselling for it.
Okay.
In the past, and this poor bloke lost his funding from the government, and I reckon he deserves to get it back in a heartbeat. But I saw Chris Davidson for nearly 2 years, and he helped me a real lot with the gambling and a lot of other issues as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, but I originally saw him for gambling, and he's such a good psychologist that he found everything that was going on in my head.
And did this begin with Coast Shelter helping start this process?
Chris Davidson, I actually had seen him before, about 5 years prior to that, like long time with this gambling problem.
Okay.
And then when I sort of got to the coast, I thought, well, no, I'm not stressing about work. I'm trying not to gamble because I don't have the money anyway. But yeah, end up just Googling him and found him on Google, and it was a gambling thing that he had his name under, and then, like I said, that we ended up going for nearly 2 years, and unfortunately he's lost his funding.
And the housing that you're in Gosford, that's Pacific Link,
That's Pacific Link, yeah, they're a brand new building that they own.
And, how do you find the kind of ongoing support and services from them? Are they responsive to things that you need? Like, do you find it to be a a good environment, a good supportive environment?
Yeah, well, like I've got Josh as part of the deal with Pacific Link.
Right, yep.
I haven't got him for that much longer, but I've got him at the moment. Josh is good at pushing, but he's also good at helping.
And is that through Together Home, is it? Yeah, sorry. Together Home, yeah.
Together Home project. And basically, when I first moved into my place at Umina, I had a lot of my own stuff, thanks to these guys again who helped me get it out of storage while I was in the refuge. And basically, anything I sort of wanted when I moved into that Together Home program, if I asked for it, I could have got it. I found that out later. I could have had a nice smart TV, but instead I've got a dumb TV. But even that, I don't think I even want a smart TV, because then it means I've got an account with some data firm somewhere. And at the moment, while I'm still on New Start, I'm very much still in a financial struggle.
Yeah, Chris?
I think you said that you had quite a lot of family on the Central Coast, or you moved back to the Central Coast because you had, was it 26 cousins?
Yeah.
Was moving back to the Central Coast, was the ability to stay with family temporarily, was that part of the decision that you made, or did you not?
I've got one cousin who runs a workshop over at West Gosford there, and it's a truck workshop. They've got a nice, fairly new truckies room, shower in it. I used to frequent that a lot when I first landed in my car, and he's one of the 2 cousins that I talk to out of those 26 cousins. And as far as all my uncles and aunties and my mother as well, I class them as the judgmental side of my family. And I got black sheep many, many years ago.
So you didn't feel comfortable like asking them for support? Is that a fair assessment?
No, I won't even approach them for support. You know, just like I've got a really good relationship with that one cousin at West Gosford. And even my uncle, his father, he sort of found out I was in with the shower there, and he wasn't real happy about it, but he sort of, I think something touched in his heart, because he said it was okay for me to keep going, but he also said to me cousin, don't let it go on forever. So, yeah, and that's just all past history, the stuff between the uncles and aunties and me. And
all families are the same.
Yeah, well, condemned a long time ago, back in my teens, so, yeah.
So when you were rough sleeping, when you were having showers in the truck depot and stuff, that's, if I got the terminology right, how are you doing other things? So how are you washing your clothes and that sort of thing?
Well, believe it or not, I'd go and do my clothes there as well, because they had a big industrial washing machine for their own overalls there. It was a truck workshop. I wasn't real impressed about sticking my nice clothes in with all, when you know that they've been washing these greasy overalls in there, but used to do the job, and they never come out with grease on them, so.
Jim, can I ask you, when you found out that the place that you're in at the moment, like they said, you know what, mate, you can stay here as long as you need. How did you feel? How did it make you feel to have some sense of permanency in that place?
Very grateful. To be short, yeah. But I couldn't believe that there was this kind of help out there.
One of the things that we've heard a bit about is that sometimes people don't know that there's help out there. They're not lucky enough to run into someone. What do you reckon we can do to better help people who maybe don't know? They don't run into a Charles, you know. What can we do to better get them linked up? Is there any advice you can give us?
I really don't know how you'd publicise it or advertise it. Most people that are homeless don't tend to buy newspapers and look at television very much. Some listen to the radio, I suppose, but whether they listen to the right station. You see most people now, they're all interested on their phone is YouTube, you know. But people are out of touch with the real world generally. I'd say everybody in this room is very in touch with the real world. I know we all are. But I really don't know how you could publicise it unless, look, I heard about this by word of mouth from someone who I thought did not deserve the help. So they're out driving around their ute, picking up scrap metal and getting settling and taking advantage of the system, getting free lunches. I don't think that's a very good way for society to move. We should all stand on our own. I feel rather embarrassed that I'm in this situation, and not proud that I'm taking the handout. Although I did work for a lot of time, very hard, earned big money and paid a lot of tax. So I don't feel totally guilty because other people have convinced me that I'm doing the right thing by myself. You are. Yeah, but I still don't feel good about it. Not good to admit. People have got it worse than me though. I feel very privileged and grateful.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
Can I touch a bit on that? And as I do, I'll just remind particularly my colleagues to talk to the microphone. I know some people are having difficulties down there. The way you're talking then, Jim, how do you feel people react towards you? Like, it was by no fault of your own you ended up in these circumstances. Do you feel discriminated against?
No.
By people and government agencies?
No, not at all. Excuse me. I've had, well, to begin with, Centrelink were very, very hard to deal with, and after numerous appointments with them, with all the appropriate paperwork, to say that I was deemed unfit for work because of my lungs. I've got a very severe breathing problem, as you probably determined. Then a couple of other little setbacks stepped in after that. But since the end of the application and the grant of disability support, I've received nothing but help and understanding from Sutherland people. And as I say, since I approached Coast Care, they've just been fantastic people. Probably saved my life.
One of the things you mentioned about the support that you've got through Coast Shelter, it's running out. You said your mate, sorry, I've forgotten his name, but Josh, for a little bit more, because you're on the package that... So there's been a bit of conversation about making that permanent, or at least extending it. I mean, would that be something that, you'd think would be a good thing?
After signing the new lease just last week to get into this new place, I'm under the understanding now that it is going to continue as Together Home project, and I'm not sure about if he's going at the end of the 2 years.
That's what you want, that Together Home project continuing on is important to you, you reckon?
Well, it's a very big help because, at the moment, I get weekly payments of New Start, and basically I don't see the rent comes out straight away. They take that before I even get it. But what I'm left with with weekly payments is the figure of $229. And if you take $229 out in the real world today, let's see how much you've got left of it tomorrow, because it goes like that.
One of the things about that, and Jim, I'd be interested in your views too, is one of the things about that program is it's based on this idea that people have got sometimes a lot of issues, health, gambling, housing, mental health sometimes, drug and alcohol sometimes. People have got a lot of issues, but if you can get them a house first, get that shelter over their head, that permanent place, then you can start maybe looking at some of those other things. Do you reckon that's the right approach from is that the right idea in terms of how we fix these problems?
Yeah, a big help. Yeah, look, a roof over your head and health are really the two things you need. We can live pretty cheaply, really, when you think about it. I don't have to eat Scotch fillet, although I like it. I don't have to eat it. Sausages are like cheapest at $10 a kilo. That's a bit of a treat. A nice sausage these days. I just saw them $20 a kilo.
Try lettuce.
Yeah.
I can't afford a lettuce. Can't afford the seeds to grow 'em.
Yeah, what potatoes going up, everything. That's one thing I have noticed because I do shop at Coles and just watching some of the prices fluctuate just in the last couple of months. And yeah, everything's sort of going up here and there, just that little bit, but every little bit, like 20 cents just on the milk I buy. You know, whereas the last 4 years it's been the same price.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we could laugh about the lettuce thing, but those kind of cost increases are really, they're hurting people, aren't they? The fact that food
we
and
can't
stuff's
really
going up.
blame anybody for it. Can't blame the farmers, can't blame the government. That's just life. People have got to accept that. There are hardships and there are hard times. Our times, when you think about it now, are nowhere near as what they were 100 years ago. People today don't realise how good we've got it. I don't think any of this was, it was available 50 years ago. So we live in good times, really, to be positive.
Yeah, g'day. Can I ask you guys, how many times did you have to repeat and tell your story when you were seeking assistance and help to people? I mean, was it once or twice, or did you have to explain the same thing?
With Coast Shelter, I approached them once and everything was sort of snowballed then. Okay. They stepped in. With Sutherland, it took me 2 years of doctor's appointments after I'd been in hospital and they told me I wouldn't be going back to work. Of course, of the COPD, which is progressing quite well. Centrelink was the hardest to deal with. Then I had a little bit of superannuation. The insurance company were a bit worse than Centrelink. They deemed themselves to be a higher authority than the government, who had deemed me disabled. When I asked for the disability payment, the insurance part of it, which a lot of people don't even know they pay for, there was all sorts of stalls and objections when I told them, look, let's go to the Ombudsman and Channel 9. I'm sure they'd like to know about this. I was paid that afternoon. But I suppose not all people can be that assertive.
Okay.
So,
what about yourself? Did you have to...
A few times I had to spiel the story off, but I wouldn't say enough to be a pain or anything like that. It was just people, and if they were asking for the story, they were just trying to find out about me anyway. But and even that, like I've still got this one big issue that come along when I was in the refuge, and it was only a month into the refuge, massive heart attack. And I do believe it was too many bacon and egg rolls in that truck and driving that Sydney traffic that sent me nuts and gave me that heart attack. But and like I look at one of my best friend the other day whinging on the phone that she couldn't buy toilet paper in Coles because the shelf was bare. Now I can really feel for both sides of that, people that can't buy it, and how many truck drivers are at home on lockdown or doing their 7 days, not being able to do their job because of this COVID going on. And then you got companies screaming out for employment at the moment. Like I could probably go and drive a truck again, but I am under the belief right now, because I've had a heart attack, to drive a truck I've got to legally tell the employer that I've had a heart attack. And I look at it, when he mentioned insurance companies, I tell an employer I've had a heart attack, he tells the insurance company he wants to insure me and his truck, and the insurance company will straight up say, not a chance. So there you go, my career's gone.
Can I then just ask you the next question, which is how difficult was it, and was it difficult, filling in all the forms? I mean, I presume you had to do paperwork?
Without this bloke here, I would have probably set fire to it by now.
Yeah.
Because I've got a thing, because of that, my desk was one of these for 30 years.
Yeah.
And forms, paperwork, just fry my brain. And without Josh, I reckon I wouldn't have even got it started yet.
Okay, and yourself, Jim?
With the paperwork with
And
those
this
guys.
guy with my tax as well.
Any paperwork to do with looking for support, looking for accommodation, people, we've heard that people want paperwork. They want a form filled in to explain what you're asking for.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Did you have to do lots of paperwork or?
Yeah.
Yep. And how did you find that?
Not really that difficult.
Yep.
If you could do a driver's log book, or a work diary,
Yep.
or a contract to sell a car, it's basically filling the spaces. You don't have to write the contract, you've only got to fill it in.
Yep. So you understood what you were, everything filling in? So that
Well, a
was-
reasonable education, no one would say.
Oh, no.
But
Not
then you
asking
go to a
that.
decent school.
Yeah. Some of the questions are always sometimes really complex, and some of them are tricky. Yeah. Okay.
Read the question carefully before you sign it.
That's good.
It
Okay.
seems-
Thanks for that.
Sorry, but it seems both of you, you've been through that tough time, but you sort of come out. Plenty of people don't come back up out of that trough. I guess what's the difference between you guys getting through that and when you look at other people that maybe haven't been able to get through that?
I think we're all just different. Some of us are survivors, some try, some don't. Some people are quite happy to just waddle along through their life and be what they are. I've got examples of that where I live. I feel really sorry for them. They've never had a good life. So I suppose, on the bright side, they haven't got much to miss. I've had a pretty good life. I miss those days, but hey, that's life. That's how it goes. Some of us have got it, some of us haven't. I've had it and I haven't got it anymore. I enjoyed it.
But even my view on that, it goes down to people's different, what stage they are with their own mental health as well. That's one thing I've noticed. It's hard to describe. But there's people out there that don't care. Like, there's people that like where they're at, and there's other people that hate where they're at but still are there. And
So it strikes me that there's not a kind of one-size-fits-all kind of approach that you can take here then, because from what we've heard from a number of people with lived experience of homelessness, there are different reasons why they fell into homelessness in the first place. But then getting out of it, some people need help with forms. Some people need mental health support. Some people need some, health help, or some sort of people driving them to appointments. Do you think that the current system allows everybody to be able to get the sort of supports that they need as individuals to get them out of homelessness? Do you think you were maybe lucky to find Coast Shelter who gave you that sort of wraparound support?
I'd say not so much lucky, smart enough to sort of look and try and help myself, because when I first landed in my car, I was not in a very good mental state at all. Because of the gambling, lots of damage to my poor brain. And just like the highlight of that I can think of was the amount of times that someone at that Coast Shelter restaurant, when they're giving me stuff that I needed. Like, I've got nothing, all I had was an esky, and after the first 3 days, all I had was a smelly box in my car, because I couldn't even put ice in the esky, because I had that 6-week break trying to get money out of Centrelink, because I basically walked away from a job. And, and I used to constantly say I'm not worthy. And it was Coast Shelter that stopped me saying that restaurant. And as far as people accessing it, it's just where the individual is in their stage of their own mental health, because you know, like I've tried to have positive words with people that I feel that are in a worse spot than me because they're actually still living on the street, and then you get these attitudes back out of their mouth, and some of them just, well, why am I bother wasting my time on you? You know, and then you get other people that are very thankful that you told them, oh, you can go and eat at Penny's.
The process from here, we as members of Parliament will now put a number of recommendations forward to the government, okay, around homelessness. And unless Peter wants this question, what do you think is something that definitely should be in that report to government, that we are telling government, a recommendation or something that you think government should be doing to either stop people from becoming homeless or helping them once they do?
Better to stop it before it starts, really, isn't it? Got to be a big advantage in that. But then how do you do that? That's up to the individual, the person that needs the help. He's got to know before he needs it, hasn't he?
Well, just the issue of youth on the streets. Usually that's conflict between children and the parents. I come from that as well. I can remember back to 16 in my own life. My birthday present was a bag, get out. You know, but I got out and straight into work at 16.
But that was the way when I was a young fella.
Yeah.
You get out in the world, go and see the world, go and do something.
Yeah, well,
get a job, go and see Australia.
And like, you know, I've basically lived with this woman for 9 years. Her daughter, who I had nothing to do with, type thing, she was not my daughter. You know, girls when they go through that 13 and 14, unbelievable. I've got a daughter who's now 26, and she could be a right cow when she was that age. And this Leah that I'm talking about, she was just unbelievable when she was that age. And the arguments with parents, like, how do you stop that? How can the government interfere with that? You can't.
Don't argue, you'll never win.
You can't,
don't do
because...
I tried a couple of times, I thought, no, I'm going to the club.
Just
Too hard.
like, you know, I've got 2 kids of my own, you know, a son 28, daughter 26 now, and they're spread both ends of this east coast, right well away from me. I believe when she originally took them away from me, she was probably doing the right thing, because I was very much out of control when they were young. But yeah, I can't see that they could interfere with a lot of this homelessness from the start. Prevent it before it happens, because there's just too many different dynamics in every household going on. You don't know what goes on behind people's doors every night. I think the police might have some idea, but when it comes down to it, once you close your front door, that's your private Idaho there. And
might actually get back to giving kids education at school and let the police have a little bit more control as well. Police don't have any right to send kids home after dark now, do they? They can't tell kids to get off the street, but it's too late, go home, it's dangerous, Eddie. They don't have the authority they used to have, don't have the respect they used to have. I knew when I grew up in Bankstown didn't have a very good reputation. And I wasn't really a saint, you know, I was no angel. Long way from being bad, but I was no angel. Testing the water as a teenager. And the authority the police had then had a big impact on my life. You know, it was, if you keep it up, mate, you get another beating. We got a clip under the ear and a toe up the bum. At school, if we played up, we got a big leather strap on the hands. I went to feel ourselves. They weren't very nice people, believe me. I'd never subject my kids to that. I wouldn't send them to that school for that reason. The punishment we got was cruel. But anyway, I think it kept me away from a worse part of life that could have been.
We might, Jim, Adam, thank you so very much for being part of this today. It actually, I think it's quite a good way to finish our hearings. We've heard some really raw stuff throughout this hearing, and to finish on what I think is a really positive, optimistic note of the way that you two gentlemen have come through this, and your attitude in particular, Jim, I think is fantastic. The way you've come through your hardships, Adam, is quite inspirational, so we thank you very much for your time here today. It's been really valuable for us, and we thank you very much. And we, of course, thank these guys, their carers, Hansard, for the work you guys are doing, and not just with these two, but across the board. So thank you very much for everything you've done, for everything you do, and being part of this today.
I'd like to thank Sheldon and Kooimba and you people for taking the time to listen to us.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That, yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, gents. That concludes our hearing. It's been a very insightful and very important hearing. We look forward to what we do next. So thank you to everyone that's been involved, not just here, but across a few days. Just a quick reminder to anyone that is here or who is listening in, that is homeless or at risk of homelessness, please call Link to Home on 1800 152 152, Domestic Violence Line on 1800 656 463, or Men's Line on 1300 789 978. And also, if there's any evidence that has been distressing and you would like to speak to someone, please call Landline on 131114. Thank you very much, committee. We will